Chapter 702. Although Da Vinci is with Tachika and Matthew, I'm still a little uneasy. Compared to the other Sky Wings, you're more steady. If something happens, just act according to the situation. Wu Ming looked into Azrael's eyes with trust. Wu Ming believed that Azrael could handle this matter well. After all, the title of the first individual to command the Sky Wings was not just for show. Yes, meow. Azrael's eyes turned cold as she replied confidently. Okay. Go on. Wu Ming nodded. Azrael spread her wings and was about to fly in the direction of Gadotsi and the others when Wu Ming suddenly called out to her. Right, there's something you need to pay attention to. Try not to be discovered by them. Wu Ming extended a finger, indicating the importance of this matter. Azrael was taken aback, but she quickly reacted and nodded. From the moment she descended into this world as a servant, Azrael could tell that the orange-haired woman had an unusual relationship with her master. And after she rashly launched an attack on the orange-haired woman, Azrael realized just how important the orange-haired woman was to her master. Her master wanted her to support the other party and try not to be discovered. This was undoubtedly to temper the other party. No matter what race it was, they would all perish in peace. The Sky Wings understood this, but they did not take it to heart. This was because they would not let themselves live in peace. Instead, they would do their best to put themselves in a dangerous state. This was because they were weapons, and they needed to fight. Although the information was not complete, Azrael understood that while the orange-haired woman was very weak, the other party was not ordinary. It could be said that she had a rather strong heart. She did not panic even after nearly being cut to death by her scythe. From this, one could see the mental fortitude of the other party. However, the other party was truly too weak. The orange-haired woman was so weak that there was no limit to it. That little girl with the shield was worth a second glance, but it was just a glance. If Wu Ming could hear Azrael's inner thoughts, he would feel helpless. Whether it was Gadotsi, who was the master, or Matthew, who was the servant, they had done their part and reached the height they should have reached. It was already a miracle that Gadotsi, who had no knowledge of magic and was only forced to come here to make up the numbers, had made it this far. If other magicians were to be the master, they would have fallen at some point. There was also Matthew. As a human who accepted the power of a servant and became a sub-servant, Matthew's strength at the moment was already a second-rate servant. To be able to reach this level as a sub-servant, no one else would be able to do it. The reason why they were able to persevere was not because of their powerful strength, but because they were more determined than anyone else. Because of the beauty and strength of the heart, Gadotsi met servants who were willing to help her and helped her break through the difficulties. Because of the tenacity and perseverance of the heart, Matthew's shield was able to block all attacks on Gadotsi, because Galahad's shield was completely in line with Matthew's characteristics. As long as the heart was firm, the shield would not be broken. This was the special nature of Galahad's shield, which made the shield in existence comparable to Artoria's absolute defense. Avalon and Wu Ming were invincible armors. This was the power of the heart. However, in Azrael's view, it was not enough to have a strong heart. Gadotsi and the others were still very weak. Therefore, it was normal for Azrael to say that they were too weak. After all, Azrael was a god-slayer. In the eyes of the god-slayer, Sky Wings, whether it was Gadotsi or Matthew, they were too weak. Just as Matthew had thought before, if Azrael had slashed Matthew's shield a few more times, Matthew's shield would probably have fallen out of his hands. And if Wu Ming had not intervened, Azrael could have teleported behind Gadotsi and beheaded her, and she would have done it so quickly that Matthew would not have been able to react. In the eyes of the strong were respected Sky Wings, weakness was the original sin. The forest elves were too weak, so Azrael's sky strike destroyed their capital. Humans were too weak, so the aftermath of the battle between a dozen races and the various gods of creation led them to the brink of extinction. The other races were too weak, so they were suppressed by the Forest Elves Alliance, the Goblins Alliance, and the Sky Wings. Meanwhile, Arthur was too weak, so he had indirectly died at the hands of Wu Ming, and the Sky Wings had been entrusted to Wu Ming. In the eyes of others, Wu-ming could have rejected Arthur's request and exterminated the sky wings with the intention of eliminating them by the roots. However, Wu-ming did not do so. Instead, he complied with Arthur's wishes and chose to take the sky wings under his command. To put it bluntly, the reason the sky wings had submitted to Wu-ming was not only because of Arthur's dying wish, but also because they were too weak. Again, weakness was the original sin. And it was precisely because they were weak that Gadotsi and Matthew needed to be tempered. It was also because of this that Wu-ming had instructed Azrael not to expose herself as much as possible. No matter who it was, the strength of their companions would often encourage them to slack off. Only when they were cornered would they go all out, and only when they went all out would their potential be stimulated. It was precisely because Gadotsi would always be in a cornered situation that she would always put her life on the line, and this spirit infected many of her followers, making them willingly follow Gadotsi. However, there was another saying that was very good: how can a person's shoes not get wet when walking by the river? Gadotsi would always be in a cornered situation, so if she went all out, it would be very easy for her to fail. In order to avoid such a situation, there was only one way. That was to make Gadotsi more and more accustomed to the situation of being cornered, and gradually reduce the level of cornered to the level of sudden events, so that he would not have to risk his life to pass every time. As such, Azrael understood Wu-ming's intentions very well. Yes, master, I understand. Meow. Azrael looked into Wu-ming's eyes and nodded. Then, magic surged, and she flapped her wings and flew into the distance. Watching Azrael leave, Wu-ming looked at Giliel. Is it my turn, master? Do I have a mission? Giliel excitedly pulled Wu-ming's arm. If it's Giliel, why don't you take a guess? Wu-ming smiled mischievously. Could it be the Sun King who attacked the desert? Giliel instantly said. Based on the available information, their current enemies were only the East and West, and the East enemy had been handed over to Azrael. So, if she was the one, it should be the West enemy, the guy who added the Sun King. You guessed right. Wu-ming nodded. However, before Giliel could cheer, Wu-ming's next sentence made her expression freeze. But it's with me. Chapter 703. In the sky at the center of the wasteland, Abendheim quietly floated high up in the sky, basking in the sunlight. The crystalline leaves on Abendheim's body glowed a dark blue under the sunlight, swaying as if it was breathing, giving off the impression that it was asleep. However, while Abendheim was not sleeping, the sky wings in its body were asleep. This was because the sky wings had lived on Abendheim's body since ancient times, and Abendheim's body had evolved into a fortress, so every sky wing had its own room. However, Abendheim did not have any doors or windows. All it had were the branches of a giant tree and the crystalline bodies that resembled leaves. The sky wings had special properties that allowed them to freely travel through space, so they did not need doors or windows. This was why Abendheim did not have any doors or windows on its body. Inside Abendheim's body, there were only rooms. Although there were corridors, they were relatively rare. After all, the sky wings could basically just pass through walls. In the bedroom-like rooms of the sky wings were floating in the air, wrapped in their own wings as they slept. Wu-ming was afraid that the sky wings would go berserk and run amok after he, Azrael, and Gapril left, so he had ordered them to enter this sleep-like, standby state. There was a reason why the sky wing species was called a weapon. This standby state was a low-energy state that the sky wing species could achieve. Every time they were seriously injured, they would maintain this state when they used a special regenerative device to repair their bodies. Although there were some who did not like to enter this standby state, such as Gapril, there was no doubt that this standby state had a faster effect on their recovery, which was why they maintained this state. Sometimes, when the sky wings lost their energy and became children, they could use the regenerative device to speed up their recovery. This was because if they did not use the regenerative device, they would have to wait several hundred years to recover. When the sky wings used the regenerative device, they would have their companions around them to protect them. After all, the regenerative device required the sky wings to activate it. However, there were no records of the sky wings collectively repairing themselves, nor were there any records of the sky wings collectively entering a standby state. If the enemy took this opportunity to attack, they would be done for. However, there was still Abenheim. After Wuming had the sky wings collectively enter a hibernation state, he had Abenheim enter the highest state of alert. As long as there was any movement in Abenheim's surroundings or inside, Abenheim would instantly awaken all the sky wings and enter attack mode. Abontiheim was not to be underestimated. As a phantasma, which was ranked second among the 16 Exceed races, Abontiheim didn't just have an advantage in terms of the amount of sprites in his body. He was an existence that could mutate and evolve into a demon king that was close to the level of a god. How could he be weak? When the deities did not appear, phantasma were the strongest. Therefore, when Arthas did not appear, the skywing breeds in Arthas' camp were not the strongest. The strongest skywing breeds under Arthas should be Abenheim, who was a phantasma. He was an existence only under Old Deus, which could be said to be the closest to a god. Previously, the Lion King and the Sun King had launched attacks of almost the same degree at the same time, and the Skywings had to work together to block the Lion King's attack. However, when faced with the Sun King's thunderous attack, Abenheim alone, a phantasma, had blocked it. This was the best proof of Abenheim's strength. Furthermore, Abenheim had the attribute bonus of being a rider. Although it was a little strange for him to ride himself, at the very least, Abenheim's strength had been increased, and he had not sacrificed his rationality like the Skywings. Whether it was a frontal attack or a sneak attack, Wuming believed that Abenheim would be able to discover and stop the enemy, protecting the Skywings. Wuming reckoned that in this era, at this singularity, only the mysterious first Hassan could infiltrate Abenheim. Although this was an era where multiple Hassans existed, based on the information Wuming had gathered, the first Hassan should not appear. First, the first Hassan had never appeared in historical records, and no one had ever claimed to have seen him. Be it the records of the summoner or the historical records of this person, they were all very mysterious. It was said that the first Hassan would behead the previous Hassan when they went astray, following the sound of the evening bell, and then enter the mystery again. This meant that it was very likely that the other party would not appear, and even if he did appear, he would be looking for Hassan and not Abenheim or the Skywings. Apart from the first Hassan, Wuming did not think that there was anyone in this era and singularity who could affect Abenheim and the Skywings. Thus, with Abenheim around, Wuming was very assured. After instructing Abenheim to protect the Skywings, Wuming set off with Gopril. Because both of them could fly, Wuming and Gopril flew toward the desert. Wuming lowered his head and looked at the border between the desert and the wasteland. There was a huge crater that was not inferior to the crater created by the Holy Spear. This was the mark left behind by the collision between the Sun King and Abenheim, and it happened to be on the border between the desert and the wasteland. However, this was not the main point. Wuming was thinking about how Ramses II had unleashed that attack. Wuming had seen very clearly that it was an attack in the form of a lightning pillar, and Wuming had no doubt that it had been unleashed by some huge object. Could it have been unleashed by the other side's temple? Wuming wondered. Based on Gadatsi's information, Wuming had obtained some information about Ramses II. The other side was a rider, and he had summoned the entire desert, an army of sphinxes, and even gathered all the temples in one place. From the looks of it, the other side's mounts had to be those temples. As for why it was not the sphinxes, it was because, according to Gadatsi's information, those sphinxes came in a large group. Rare things were expensive, and too many of them were cheap. If the mounts were those sphinxes, then Ramses II's value would be too low, Wuming joked before shaking his head. In short, no matter what the other side's mounts were, if they could not come to an agreement, he would just have Gopril unleash a sky strike. With that in mind, Wuming looked at the beaming Gopril flying beside him. Seeing Wuming look at her, Gopril's smile became even more radiant. "What's the matter, master?" Chapter 704. Are you okay, Gopril? Wuming smiled awkwardly. Wuming felt that his joke just now had made Gopril unhappy. Gopril originally thought that she could go alone, but in the end, she had to go with Wooming. How unpleasant was that? It was like a parent agreeing to let you go out and play with your friends, but in the end, when you were playing with your friends, the parent was sitting next to you. How restrained was that? Wooming felt that Goprel was now a child who was throwing a tantrum, and he was the parent who made her throw a tantrum. I'm completely fine, Master. Goprel's smile became even brighter. If you're fine, then you're fine. Wooming nodded calmly and stopped asking. Wooming felt that if he continued to ask, something terrible might happen. Not only did women have a sixth sense, but so did Wooming. And Wooming believed in his intuition most of the time because his intuition was right every time. Right, Master, let's go steal something this time. Do you want me to use Sky Strike directly? Goprel suggested, kindly. Overruled. Wooming rejected Goprel's suggestion without even thinking about it. Why? Is Master not going to let me do it? Goprel guessed with a very puzzled expression. How could that be? Wooming shook his head, expressing that he would not think that way. I hope you don't have to do it, but that's too unrealistic. Wooming thought in his heart. In fact, rather than Wooming bringing Goprel to find Ramses II, it was more accurate to say that Wooming is worried that an accident will happen if he leaves Goprel alone. If Goprel were to be on standby or follow Azrael to the Holy City, Wooming felt that Goprel would definitely do something. After all, she was now a berserker. Even Azrael, who was the original individual, was affected by berserk. Wooming did not think that Goprel was not affected by berserk. Although Goprel did not seem to have changed at all, this was just the calm before the storm. Wooming believed that if Goprel no longer suppressed herself and completely released herself, she would definitely become a true berserker. Although it was not to the extent of harming her allies, the Sky Wings and Wooming, Gadotsi, and Anne and the others would not be spared. Moreover, if Goprel were to get angry, she would probably kill her allies just the same. That was why Wooming had chosen to have Goprel follow him and not act alone or with others. According to the information from Tachika and the others, Ramses II probably won't be able to summon the Holy Grail so easily. When the time comes, I don't mind you using Sky Strike. Wooming's words made Goprel's eyes light up. Really, Master? But take it easy when using Sky Strike. Don't use up all your mana, Wooming emphasized. Yes. I'll control it, Master. Goprel gave Wooming an obedient smile. However, the more obedient Goprel was, the more uneasy Wooming felt. Goprel was the kind of person who could use up all her elves with a single Sky Strike. She would definitely not save them for a second Sky Strike. However, Goprel could not be said to be stupid, only reckless. No Sky Wing would directly use Sky Strike on the Forest Elves' capital just because they got a bump on their head from the defensive magic of the Forest Elves. That was the capital of the Forest Elves. Even she would have to check the situation before launching an attack. What if the enemy had some secret weapon? However, because of the bump on her head, Goprel had directly used Sky Strike at its maximum capacity. The important thing was that Goprel had succeeded. She had successfully destroyed the capital of the Forest Elves. A large number of precious books that recorded many spells had been plundered, and the Forest Elves had directly changed their capital. There was no doubt that there was a problem with this. If the Forest Elves were so weak that they were almost wiped out by a Sky Wing, then what qualifications did they have to be the best in this war? As for the reason, Wooming had learned from Azrael. At the time, the Forest Elves had just fought with the Goblins, and the Forest Elves had been stolen by the Goblins. The Forest Elves, who had activated all sorts of spells, including the Forbidden Flight spell, were prepared to use this opportunity to correct themselves. In the end, it was the Forbidden Flight spell that had caused Goprel, who had been drawn over by the battle, to be hit. Afterward, Goprel touched the bump on her head with tears in her eyes and used Sky Strike on the Forest Elves' capital, which nearly exhausted all the elves in her body. The Forest Elves' most serious problem was that after they had repelled the Goblins, they had been ambushed by the Sky Wings. Goprel left with a large number of books in satisfaction, while the Forest Elves retreated, choosing to directly retreat and rebuild their capital in another place. After all, that place had already been discovered by the goblins and was no longer safe. Sooner or later, they would have to find another place to build their new capital. Moreover, that place had been baptized by the Skywing Skystrike. Compared to building a new capital after rebuilding it, the forest elves chose to build their new capital in another place. Azrael already told me that after you brought the books you obtained from raiding the forest elves' capital back to Abanti, your body became smaller due to overexertion of your elves. Wuming bluntly exposed Gopril's past. That's because I was too angry, actually causing a bump on my noble head. How could I not teach those long-eared fellows a lesson? Gopril stroked her head as if it was a treasure. Gopril understood what Wuming was talking about. After all, even she had only succeeded in raiding a capital once. Furthermore, I had good control over my elves. Even I wouldn't expose my weak people to the enemy, Gopril said solemnly. That was because if they had encountered a slightly stronger enemy at that time, the only outcome would have been death. While it was true that the sky wings were weapons, they would not fearlessly throw their lives away. Thus, the sky wings would basically not let themselves exhaust their energy and turn into children, or rather, they would do their best to avoid that, except for Gopril. Whether it was healing injuries or recovering energy, only Gopril would frequently use it. Even the sky wings would not directly use Skystrike. After all, it consumed too much energy. Only Gopril would frequently use Skystrike without restraint. It could only be said that she truly lived up to her name. Not only was her strength outstanding, even her personality was unrivaled. It was not as if this bold heart of hers did not bring benefits. Gopril had a superhuman record of challenging the dragon elves 5 times and finally successfully subduing them all by herself. Although, Gopril had almost died. Besides, isn't Master still here? I believe that Master won't ignore me, his kin. Gopril had an expression of hugging the thigh of a big shot. This made Wuming helplessly smile. Arthas is no longer here, so I'm now your guardian. Whether it's you or the other sky wings, you'd better be careful. I don't want to see your numbers dwindle so soon after Arthas entrusted you to me. After Wuming said that, he gave Gopril a knock on the head. Ouch! Gopril's eyes were filled with tears. Wuming helplessly shook his head. Gopril was clearly faking it. He had not used much strength, but this could be considered giving Wuming face. Afterward, Wuming increased his speed, and without turning his head, he said to Gopril, who was hugging her head with tears in her eyes, "Hurry up and follow me. If you're too slow, I won't give you the chance to use Skystrike." Sure enough, Jillian instantly smiled and spread her wings, catching up to him. Yes, yes, Master. Chapter 705. Due to the increased flying speed, Wuming and Gopril soon entered the desert area. Perhaps the Sun King knew that Wuming was coming, but a sandstorm suddenly appeared in the desert where the weather was not bad. Moreover, this was not an ordinary sandstorm. The magic power contained in it was enough to easily crush an ordinary human body. With that, Wuming was even more certain that it was caused by the Sun King. As for the reason, Wuming did not think that it was because of expulsion, but because the power of the sandstorm was too weak. Perhaps it was because Wuming and Gopril flew in, and the Sun King's goal was to force Wuming and Gopril to land. However, Wuming did not want to buy it because he had no intention of obtaining the Holy Grail peacefully, and there was no need for it. In the sandstorm, Wuming and Gopril were still flying. Apart from being a little blurry, the sandstorm did not hinder Wuming and Gopril in any way. Gopril only needed to keep magic power around her body to isolate the sandstorm from her body. Wuming was even more simple and crude. He only laid out a layer of psychic power around himself. Wuming also tried to break the sandstorm, but every time he did, a new sandstorm would appear in a few seconds. In addition, after entering the desert, Wuming had a feeling that he had entered someone else's territory. Therefore, Wuming guessed that the entire desert was likely under the Sun King's control. But judging from the fact that the Sun King only summoned the sandstorm in the desert area, the Sun King's control might not be strong. The reason was unknown. Ah, right. Wuming also vaguely saw something similar to a sphinx in the sandstorm. That should be the sphinx mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. But every time Goprel unwillingly broke the sandstorm, the sphinx would disappear without a trace. Only when the sandstorm was summoned again would the sphinx reveal a trace of their figure. After Wuming broke the sandstorm for the first time and saw that the sandstorm was summoned again in a few seconds, he no longer bothered to deal with the sandstorm. However, Goprel refused to give up and kept trying. Although she was also interested in the sphinx, Wuming felt that it was more due to Goprel's character and the influence of the berserker. Although Goprel failed every time, Goprel was so angry that she almost released Skystrike. If Wuming had not stopped her, she would have been in a stalemate with the sandstorm until her mana ran out. Just like that, accompanied by the sandstorm, Wuming and Goprel flew toward the location of the central shrine provided by Gadotsi. This hateful sand is really annoying. Goprel gritted her teeth and followed behind Wuming. The sand rolled up by the sandstorm was like raindrops that constantly slapped against the mana released by Goprel. This made Goprel, who was helpless against the sandstorm, very frustrated. You have to learn to calm down. I won't let you change your habit of loving slaughter. Not to mention, you who love slaughter need to be calm because once you lose your cool, it means that you have lost half the battle. So, you need to calm yourself down quickly, Wuming said to Goprel without turning his head. Although Wuming was not against slaughter, he did not like it either. Moreover, Wuming, who was used to living a peaceful life, was gradually moving closer to not liking slaughter. Besides, if you use your mana recklessly because you're frustrated, when your mana runs out, you'll have to leave. You don't want to leave immediately after arriving in another world, right? You won't be able to enjoy anything like that. Wuming scared Goprel. Isn't there still a master? After I arrived in this world, I received some strange information. A master can replenish a servant's mana. With a master here, how can I leave? Goprel had an expression that said, this way, it won't matter even if I casually release Skystrike. Indeed, because there were too many sky wings, Wuming could not continuously supply mana to them. To put it simply, he had cut off the mana supply link. However, if the sky wings ran out of mana, Wuming still had a way to supply them with mana. All he had to do was open the mana supply link. After all, Wuming was the master of the sky wings. Although the mana supply contract was not connected, the master-servant contract still existed. As long as there was a master-servant contract between the sky wings and Wuming, the sky wings would not disappear. As such, Wuming could take the initiative to open the mana supply link and provide the sky wings with mana. That's the case, but I can also choose not to provide you with mana, Goprel. Wuming smugly smiled. Why is it like this, master? Goprel's expression instantly turned sullen. She did not think that Wuming was joking. She had a feeling that if Goprel really used her mana recklessly and left due to a lack of mana, Wuming would definitely not provide her with mana. Right after that, Goprel's expression changed once more. But I'm really annoyed. Although these annoying grains of sand can be crushed like flesh, they can always regenerate. It's really annoying. Goprel tried to act cute. After all, Goprel was not Wuming. If even Wuming was a little dissatisfied, there was no need to mention Goprel. She did not have that kind of patience. Moreover, Jillian was currently a berserker. Berserk was constantly affecting her. However, even if Goprel was not affected by berserk, she would still be so irritable. After all, she was the alien Goprel that gave the sky wings a headache. Then close your eyes and don't look. Just fly straight ahead, Wuming very irresponsibly said. Master is bullying me. I'm going to complain to Azrael. Wuming did not say anything else. He felt that it might be because he had been very kind, which led to Goprel's reckless behavior. Although Wuming did not find it annoying, there were times when Wuming felt a headache coming on because of Goprel. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Aside from Goprel, the other Skywings treated Wuming with respect, not showing any signs of dissatisfaction or enmity. Thus, Wuming did not need to appear very fierce. Gopral was the only one who treated Wuming very casually, and Wuming could not be bothered to get angry. Thus, in such situations, he would just ignore Gopral. "Master, up ahead." Wuming was a little distracted as he wondered if he should change his attitude. Gopral's voice brought Wuming back to his senses. Looking up ahead, Wuming saw that there were quite a few Egyptian buildings not far away, and the sandstorm around them had basically dissipated. In other words, have we arrived? Chapter 706. The sandstorm dissipated without a trace, and the sun shone directly on the vast desert. A large group of ancient Egyptian buildings stood in the desert illuminated by the sun. The sun seemed to be a foil, shining on these magnificent buildings like the residence of the sun god. What appeared in front of Wuming were ancient buildings, including pyramids, temples, and so on. Generally speaking, such large buildings should not be built together. Coupled with the fact that Wuming did not see any buildings on the way, it undoubtedly confirmed one point. The other party had moved the buildings that were originally scattered in the desert to form such a magnificent group of buildings. And the other party did not place them randomly. The placement of these buildings was full of architectural aesthetics. The pyramids were next to each other, and the temples seemed to be combined. They were no less magnificent than the pyramids. The walls of each building were carved with figures and beautiful patterns. The sphinxes around the buildings were like guards, standing on both sides of the buildings, giving people a feeling that they could really come to life. A large number of giant pillars stood in the open space, setting off the other buildings. It was quite spectacular. Wuming glanced around. The number of buildings here was at least dozens, and the various buildings were compatible with each other, giving people a sense of natural beauty. And these buildings looked as if they had always been here. It was impossible to tell that they had been moved here. These buildings were obviously in the ancient Egyptian style, but they did not have an ancient aura. They were all brand new, as if they had been baptized by the sun. As expected of the famous Ramses II. In my opinion, history's praise for him has been degraded a lot, Wuming praised. Wuming had never seen Ramses II, but he knew a lot from history books and other records. Ramses II succeeded the throne. In order to consolidate Egypt, he sent troops abroad and carried out expeditions. And he fought intermittent wars with the empire that occupied Syria at that time, the Hittite Empire, for 16 years. At that time, the Hittites were not weak, because if they were weak, they would not have been able to occupy most of the land in Syria. The geographical location of Syria at that time was quite controversial. Ancient Syria was located at the junction of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was the central link of sea and land trade. However, the superior geographical location attracted the attention of the surrounding powers, and the ancient Egyptian kingdom was even more interested in it. However, since the Hittites were able to occupy most of Syria, their strength was needless to say. Ramses II, who was able to fight a war with the Hittites, was not weak in terms of military strength. After concluding a peace treaty with the Hittites, Ramses II used his own talent and communication to bring ancient Egypt to its peak. As a pharaoh, king of gods, he loved the people, and the people loved him. After Ramses II died, people worshipped him as the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although he claimed to be the incarnation of the sun god when he was alive, although ancient Egypt immediately fell after his death, this did not hinder Ramses II's great achievements. In addition to these, Ramses II was also quite accomplished in the art of architecture. He had built many temples and rebuilt many of his predecessors' buildings, including temples, grottos, mausoleums, pyramids, sphinxes, and so on. He added bricks and tiles to those ancient buildings, making them more artistic. In the last 30 years of his life, Ramses II built a large number of shrines like crazy. Moreover, he arrogantly engraved his name on all the buildings of the previous generations that he had modified. What was even more serious was that he had randomly changed the monuments and portraits of people to his own, trying to claim the achievements of the previous generations of pharaohs as his own. Wu-ming estimated that it was for these reasons that Ramses II could have such a magnificent complex of buildings. In short, Ramses II could be said to be one of the greatest pharaohs in the history of ancient Egypt. Suddenly, a man's wild laughter resounded over the entire shrine. Ha 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 ha, good, very good, Silver Knight, praise me to your heart's content, ha 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 ha. The wild laughter continued, making people wonder how much air the man had in his lungs. This laughter is probably Ramses II, Wu-ming said to Giliel, who was flying beside him. Perhaps only Ramses II would laugh out loud after hearing Wu-ming praise Ramses II. Master, it seems that he's very arrogant. Giliel's eyes glowed red. Calm down, Giliel. Wu-ming pressed his hand, which was enchanted with magic, on Giliel's head and rubbed it a few times. I know. Giliel, who had originally wanted to kill him, instantly calmed down. She hid behind Wu-ming and tidied up her hair, which had become a chicken's nest. Even if she was a sky wing, even if she was a weapon, Giliel was still a young girl. What a joke. Why would a sky wing care about her appearance? The reason Giliel hid behind Wu-ming was that when Wu-ming rubbed Giliel's head, the magic power emitted from his hand hit Giliel's head. That hit was no less than if Wu-ming had hit Giliel's head. As for why he didn't just knock her on the head, since there were outsiders present, he had to give Gillian some face. As for why Giliel hid behind Wu-ming, it was because Giliel's body was slightly stronger. Wu-ming had increased the output of magic power. Thus, Giliel had already suffered a slight concussion. Only at this level could Gillian's crazy mind calm down. After making Giliel behave, Wu-ming looked at the shrine complex below. Sun King, why don't you come out and welcome the guests? Wu-ming's voice was very soft, but because of the magic power, it could still spread throughout the shrine complex. The other party did not reply, but a few seconds later, a figure walked out from the entrance of the central shrine. Wu-ming took a closer look and saw that it was a dark-skinned young girl. Her long hair reached the ground, and she wore gorgeous accessories on her head, body, and limbs. Her revealing Egyptian clothes could only cover her chest and lower body. She held a simple scepter with an eagle's head at the top. Please follow me. Lord Usmens is already waiting in the hall. Chapter 707. A black-skinned, noble-looking, long-haired girl holding a scepter. This was the information Wu-ming obtained from Gadotsi about Pharaoh Nitornis. And this new girl matched the characteristics of Nitornis's information very well. Wu-ming guessed that the girl who came out to welcome Wu-ming and Goprel should be the Nitornis mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. And according to Gadotsi, Nitornis seemed to be a subordinate of Ramses II. In other words, this invitation was not issued by Nitornis, but by Ramses II. Facing Ramses II's invitation that seemed like a feast at Hongmen, Wu-ming's heart was unperturbed, and he did not feel like laughing. Goprel, stay here, Wu-ming said to Goprel behind him. Why, master? Goprel, who was holding her head in discomfort due to her concussion, instantly felt better. She suddenly came to Wu-ming's side, spread her wings, and flapped them. I have an important mission for you. Remember, if I don't come out after half an hour, or if something strange happens after I enter the temple, use Sky Strike. Wu-ming tilted his head and looked at Goprel, who had flown to his left. Then, Goprel became excited. Can I use Sky Strike? Understood. Leave it to me, master, remember the conditions. I'm not letting you use Sky Strike casually, Wu-ming emphasized helplessly. Yes, master, don't worry and go. Just leave the rest to me, Giliel seemed to understand and nodded with a smile. However, Wu-ming suspected that Goprel might not have listened, but it did not matter. Wu-ming did not expect Goprel to listen. He only needed her to stay outside obediently. Wu-ming was afraid that Goprel and Wu-ming would cause trouble after entering the shrine. The laughter from before was undoubtedly from Ramses II, and through that laughter, Wu-ming could determine that Ramses II was definitely a king comparable to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh might seem to treat Wu-ming well, but as Gilgamesh's guardian, Wu-ming understood Gilgamesh very well. Gilgamesh was an out-and-out villain in modern society. But this was not the point. The point was that Gilgamesh's mouth was too stinky. Through Ramses II's laughter, Wu Ming realized that Ramses II was probably a character similar to Gilgamesh. Of course, the other party might not have as stinky a mouth as Gilgamesh, but his character was definitely peculiar. And with Gopril's irritable character and the berserk effect brought about by the berserker rank, Wu Ming judged that Ramses II was a guy who did not get along well with Gopril. Since the other party was trying peaceful means before resorting to force, Wu Ming naturally wouldn't disrespect the other party. However, if Wu Ming were to bring Jillian in as well, Jillian would probably get so angry that she would start a fight right away. There was another point. If Wu Ming and Ramses II's negotiation fell apart, then Gopril could act as support and directly attack from the outside. All in all, it was best for Gopril to stay outside. Also, take it easy when releasing Sky Strike. Don't use up all your magic power in one go, Wu Ming reminded. Yes, master, I will pay attention. Looking at Gopril's rather sincere face, Wu Ming chose to give up. Then, Wu Ming flew toward the entrance of the great shrine below. Seeing that only Wu Ming had come over, Nitocris did not have any doubts. A king should talk to a king. What was the point of dragging a subordinate along? Even Nitocris herself was prepared to leave after bringing Wu Ming to Ramses II's room in the great shrine. Please follow me, Sir Knight, Nitocris bowed slightly and said respectfully to Wu Ming. Wu Ming nodded, and then the two entered the entrance together. The shadows engulfed the two. Gopril watched as Wu Ming entered the great shrine. She had originally been flying in the sky, but now she was lying down in the sky, not minding that she was wearing revealing clothes. Needless to say, the skywing species that was full of elves and now had wings full of magic power could indeed lie down in the sky like this. Then, what should I do to pass the time now? Gopril said, bored. She could naturally wait, but she had to find something to pass the time. Strictly speaking, Wu Ming did not restrict Gopril from finding something to do to pass the time. At this time, Gopril inadvertently saw some creatures that resembled sphinxes emerging from the sand in the desert below. The sphinxes gathered at the great shrine where Wu Ming had entered, looking around vigilantly like guards. Hee hee, Gopril laughed, the kind that was very happy. In the great shrine, in the corridor leading to the central stone room, Nitocris walked in front, and Wu Ming followed behind. Nitocris led Wu Ming silently, and Wu Ming followed behind silently. The former was because there was no need to take the initiative to speak, while the latter was because he was admiring the murals on both sides of the corridor. Wu Ming was very interested in these murals, or rather, it was because Wu Ming had never seen any murals before. Although Wu Ming had experienced many worlds and spent a lot of time, Wu Ming had never seen any murals before. Although he was not curious, Wu Ming was quite interested in these precious products of human spiritual culture. Since there was a chance to come into contact with them, Wu Ming naturally would not let it go. Although Wu Ming did not know much about murals and did not understand the meaning expressed by the murals, he could still understand the contents of these murals. These murals depicted the deeds of Ramses II, including the succession of Ramses II, his love and marriage with Nefertari, the war against the Hittite Empire, the signing of contracts, the construction of buildings, the making of ancient Egypt to prosperity, and all the other deeds. It was like a historical poem of Ramses II. However, Wu Ming smiled and shook his head at the fact that Ramses II had recorded almost all his deeds on the murals. This guy is quite narcissistic, Wu Ming commented casually. Hearing Wu Ming's words, Nitocris, who was walking in front of Wu Ming, suddenly spoke. It's not narcissism, it's the honor that Lord Usmens deserves. What Nitocris said was reasonable, but Wu Ming did not care about this. He was more concerned about Nitocris, who had a fate with Gadotsi. You are the pharaoh Nitocris of ancient Egypt, right? Chapter 708. Her footsteps paused, but she recovered in an instant and continued to lead Wu Ming forward. Yes, I am indeed Pharaoh Nitornis. May I know how you know who I am, my lord? Nitornis appeared to be slightly surprised. After all, she had never introduced herself before. I met Tachika, and she told me of your existence. Wuming noticed Nidikal's pause, but he didn't say much. Instead, he directly told her how he knew Nidikal's identity. The master of Chaldea. Nidikal said lightly, but it seemed that she didn't mean what she said. Wuming could see that Nidikals obviously knew Gadotsi, but for some reason, she seemed to have some concerns. It was probably because of her position. Ramses II did drive Gadotsi and the others out of the desert, but this didn't mean that Ramses II treated Gadotsi and the others as enemies. In Wuming's view, Ramses II's various actions showed that he didn't treat Gadotsi and the others who belonged to Chaldea as enemies at all. If Ramses II treated Gadotsi and the others as enemies, Gadotsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci probably wouldn't be able to leave the desert. Wuming didn't have the slightest doubt. He believed that Ramses II definitely had the ability to do so. Although Ramses II didn't seem to have much hostility toward Gadotsi and the others, that was only a hidden phenomenon. On the surface, Ramses II, who punished Gadotsi and the others and drove Gadotsi and the others out of the desert, was hostile toward Gadotsi and the others. That was what Nidikals thought as well. From the conversation with Nidikals, Wuming could see that Nidikals respected Ramses II very much. Although it didn't reach the state of crazy reverence, Wuming still saw the look of a die-hard fan in Nidikals' eyes. Also, Nitocris didn't seem to have a very high IQ. After all, in the eyes of a slightly smarter person, Ramses II's actions were obvious. His various actions all showed that he let go Gadotsi and the others of Chaldea and the others. Gadotsi told Wuming that Ramses II punished them for disrespecting him, and Gadotsi and the others passed this trial called punishment, but actually test. But this was different in Nidikals' eyes. The king was angry, Chaldea and the others weren't punished, so the king drove Chaldea and the others away. This was Nidikals' point of view. Therefore, to Nidikals, who was a die-hard fan of Ramses II, Gadotsi was now an enemy. However, Nidikals had a good impression of Gadotsi and the others, and she didn't want to treat Gadotsi and the others as enemies. However, the issue of standpoint forced Nidikals to choose to stand against Gadotsi. Therefore, Nidikals was a little worried. This level of concern couldn't be eliminated in an instant, and Wuming knew this very well. But it shouldn't be a problem to pass a message. Even if Ramses II heard it, he probably wouldn't use this as an excuse to punish Nidikals. After all, he was a king, pharaoh. It was too degrading for him to be so narrow-minded. Tachika told me, if you see Miss Nidikals, please thank her for me. Sigh, Wuming's words stunned Nidikals, and she stopped in her tracks. Wuming wasn't lying. Before Gadotsi left, she told Wuming to thank Nidikals when he saw her. Wuming didn't stop and continued. She said she was grateful that you brought them to find the supplies, and that you brought them to meet Ramses II. She was even more grateful that you sent them away. I don't have the right to be thanked by Miss Tachika. Standing in front of Wuming with her back facing Wuming, Nidikals shook her head silently. I brought them here to get the supplies because Miss Tachika and the others saved me when I was kidnapped. I brought them to meet Lord Osmentis because Lord Osmentis requested it. I sent them away from the desert because they passed Lord Osmentis' test, and I only sent them for a short distance. From Nidikals' perspective, she brought Gadotsi and the others here just to return the favor, but her return of the favor put Gadotsi and the others in some danger. Fortunately, Gadotsi passed Ramses II's test, or else Nidikals would be condemned in her heart. However, Wuming didn't know what Nidikals was thinking, and he was slightly surprised. Nidikals' analysis was clear and logical, which made Wuming see Nidikals in a new light. This guy's IQ isn't low. Nidikals suddenly stopped, turned around, and stared straight into Wuming's eyes with narrowed eyes. I feel like you're thinking of something rude, Lord. Why would I? Wuming shook his head calmly. He had to be thick-skinned. All in all, I'm very grateful for your help to Tachika. Thank you. Wuming's words were full of sincerity, which made Nidikals a little confused. It's nothing. Nidikals shook her head again. Let's go, We're about to reach Lord Osmentis' throne, Nidicles said as she started walking. Wuming followed. You seem to respect Ramses II a lot. Wuming asked casually. Of course, because Lord Osmentis is the king of kings, the pharaoh of pharaohs. He's the role model for pharaohs like me who haven't reached the kingdom of heaven. Nidicles became excited when talking about Ramses II. The kingdom of eternity, huh? Wuming crossed his arms as he pondered. It seemed that in ancient Egypt, pharaohs were the incarnations of gods, and there was a saying that went like this. After the pharaohs died, they would ascend to the kingdom of eternity and return to the god's side. For Nidicles, who had become a heroic spirit, this meant that she had not returned to the kingdom of eternity. Although Ramses II had also become a heroic spirit, his ability seemed to be much stronger than Nidicles. Perhaps it was because of this that Nidicles had the feeling that Ramses II had entered the kingdom of heaven, and that she was inferior to Ramses II. Really, you're not weak either. Wuming, who was behind Nidicles, smiled helplessly. Did you say something? Nidicles stopped and looked at Wuming. No, nothing, I was just talking to myself. Since there's nothing else, I should take my leave, Nidicles said. Nidicles pointed at the door in front of them, then spoke. We're here. Chapter 709. Wuming looked in the direction Nitocris was pointing at. It was the end of the corridor, and there was a simple earthen yellow stone door carved with decorative patterns. Without a doubt, behind the stone door was where Ramses II was. I'll take my leave first, sir. Lord Osmanthus is waiting for you inside, Nidicles said and turned to leave. Wait a minute, Pharaoh Nidicles. Wuming stopped her. Is there anything else you need? Nitocris looked at Wuming, who had stopped her with a puzzled expression. Didn't Ramses II tell you my name? Why do you keep addressing me as sir? After all, if it was Ramses II, he should be aware of Wuming's identity. And as someone sent by Ramses II to entertain Wuming, Nidicles should know Wuming's name. That would be too rude to Wuming, who was a guest. No, Lord Osmanthus told me your name, the most mysterious legendary knight under King Arthur's command, Britain's silver dragon, Vilo Sirenthod. This time, it was Wuming who was stunned. Since Nidicles knew his identity, why didn't she address Wuming by that name, but instead used the vague title of Sir to address Wuming? Although this body is the body of a sinner who has yet to enter the kingdom of eternity, this body also has some abilities because of the name of Pharaoh, Nidicles explained. Although Lord Osmanthus told me that your identity is a Knight of the Round Table, this body can still see that your true identity is not so. Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh was half-pushed, she still obtained divinity, the son of the sky god Horus, and his incarnation. Immediately after, Nidicles suddenly became respectful. Just like Lord Osmanthus is the incarnation of the sun god Ra, although I can't see your true body clearly, I still see some clues. You are a great person. Immediately after, Nidicles revealed an embarrassed look. Because I can see that your identity is not as simple as a Knight of the Round Table, I can no longer address you as Vilo Sirenthod. Similarly, because I can't see what your true identity is, I can only address you as a vague title like Sir. After Nidicles' explanation, Wuming felt relieved. Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh wasn't as legitimate as other pharaoh, she was still the incarnation of a god. It was normal for her to be able to see some clues about Wuming's identity. But in this case, didn't Ramses II, was a pharaoh was a Pharaoh Sirenthod? Pharaoh Sirenthod, but he didn't tell Pharaoh Sirenthod Saranthan, Saranthos. However, Ramses II didn't tell her about the origin dragon. Although she didn't know why, it wasn't important anymore. Because Wuming was about to meet Ramses II, it was better to ask all his questions face to face. As for Nidicles, it's a little perfunctory to call a refugee without a name. Just call me Vilo. After all, I'm just a knight now, Wuming replied. Since Ramses II didn't tell his subordinates about Wuming's secret, then Wuming wouldn't take his place. Yes, Sir Vilo. Since I've brought you here, I'll take my leave now, Nitornis said before she walked into the dimly lit corridor behind her. Meeting is fate. Let me give you an evaluation. Upon hearing Wuming's words, Nitornis stopped in her tracks again. Not entering the kingdom of eternity doesn't mean that you're unqualified as a pharaoh. In my opinion, even a pharaoh who was raised to the position of a pharaoh like a puppet is able to choose death to avenge his family. Such a pharaoh isn't inferior to other pharaoh. Wuming's words shocked Nitornis. As for why, it was because no one had said such words to her before. I inform you as a great person. You should be proud of it. Thank you for your praise, Sir Villo. Master of Chaldea, with the help of someone like you, I don't have to worry about their safety. Nitornis didn't turn around and spoke with her back facing Wuming. Saying this, Nitocris left. This time, Wuming didn't stop Nitornis and let her leave on her own. I see. Great stupidity appears to be wisdom. Wuming nodded. As expected, a pharaoh, even if she was a puppet, wasn't someone without intelligence. Nitornis might have guessed that Wuming came to obtain the Holy Grail for Gadotsi. Although Wuming prepared to obtain the Holy Grail in order to ruin Artoria's plan, Wuming's goal of obtaining the Holy Grail was ultimately for Gadotsi, or rather, Chaldea. But the reason wasn't important anymore because Wuming was about to face the Sun King, Ramses II, who held the Holy Grail. Without any hesitation, Wuming walked up to the stone door and used a little force. The stone door seemed to have some kind of mechanism, and Wuming pushed it open with a little force. The first thing that entered Wuming's eyes was the dazzling sunlight. Wuming squinted his eyes subconsciously. After that, an unusually spacious hall appeared in front of Wuming. Unlike the gloomy corridor that Wuming passed by before, this hall seemed to be under the sun. The hall was very spacious, and from the outside, it was impossible to tell that there was such a spacious space inside the hall. The walls around the hall were also engraved with murals, and the surrounding walls extended diagonally with the centermost point as the center. It felt like a pyramid. However, in this spacious space, it didn't seem like a pyramid at all. Only people with eyesight like Wuming could see it. At the very least, ordinary people like Gadotsi wouldn't be able to see it. Several thick load-bearing pillars were arranged in a regular pattern in the hall. Sunlight that appeared out of nowhere sprinkled on the walls and floor, dyeing them with a layer of golden color. In the centermost position, there was a high platform that looked like a small pyramid. Step-like steps were located in front of this high platform. This was undoubtedly the throne. And at the highest point of this throne sat a dark-skinned man in gorgeous ancient Egyptian clothing. This should be Sun King, Ramses II. Chapter 7:10. The one sitting on the throne was indeed Ramses II. At this moment, Ramses II's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep from the long wait. After Wuming stared at the other party for a few seconds, Ramses II opened his eyes as if his heart was connected. Ramses II stared at Wuming's crimson eyes with his golden eyes and slowly opened his mouth. You're finally here, Origin Dragon. Ramses II's words made Wuming certain that the other party indeed knew his identity. Take a seat. After Ramses II finished speaking, a cloud of sand suddenly appeared on the throne to his side. The sand condensed and turned into a stone seat. Wuming's identity was qualified to sit on the same level as him, and Ramses II's personality wasn't as bad as Gilgamesh's, so he prepared a seat for Wuming. Wuming didn't argue and walked up the stairs to the throne. The reason why he didn't use a portal to go up directly was mainly to give the other party face. To be treated as an equal by such a king, even Wuming knew when to advance and when to retreat. Wuming walked up the throne unhurriedly and sat down on the seat that Ramses II had prepared for him. Then, Wuming's body surged with magic power and blue flames burned, covering Wuming's armor. Wuming waved his hand and the flames dissipated. Wuming, who was originally wearing armor, was now wearing a ceremonial robe that Wuming had worn in Camelot. The ceremonial robe was something that Wuming had casually condensed with magic power, so he changed into a ceremonial robe. After all, it was rude to wear armor during a meeting. Nice to meet you, Sun King Ramses II. I'm glad to be able to have a peaceful conversation with you. Wu Ming took the initiative to greet him. I'm also quite interested in your existence. Although you're still young, I can't see through your strength. As expected of the Great One. Ramses II maintained the posture of holding his head with one hand and commented on Wu Ming. I'm quite surprised by you. In my opinion, an existence like you should have the same personality as Gilgamesh. Wu Ming meant that Ramses II's attitude toward him was a little too good. As a pharaoh, the king of kings, I'm naturally arrogant, but my arrogance doesn't mean I'm extremely conceited. I'm different from the Golden King, Ramses II said while still holding his head with one hand. It seemed that Ramses II still knew Gilgamesh. Then, why don't you tell Pharaoh Nitornis about my true identity? As a pharaoh, the child of the sky god is still too immature. And I don't need to say more about this. She has already seen some clues. Although Ramses II's words were reasonable, Wu Ming felt that he was actually in a good mood and didn't tell Nitornis about Wu Ming's true identity. It was probably time to change the topic. Let's cut to the chase. Dragon of origin, you came to my territory pretending to be a Lion King knight. What business do you have? Ramses II's eyes were arrogant and his voice was calm. There's no such thing as pretending. This body's spiritual base is King Arthur's knight. It's just that I tampered with it a little so that I can use the power of my true body. After all, Wu Ming thought that it would be a little difficult for him to deal with this singularity where the spiritual base of Vilo Saranthod was severely damaged. Although it wasn't to the extent that he was lacking in strength, but if he really needed to fight, Wu Ming would have a hard time. After all, in many cases, violence was the best way to solve a problem, just like how Wu Ming persuaded Tristan to surrender with violence. Oh, that means, you didn't come to me as a Lion King knight? Ramses II squinted his eyes and smiled. If that's the case, you should be here for the Master of Chaldea. With just one sentence and the current situation, he was able to analyze the camp that Wu Ming belonged to. This made Wu Ming very impressed. As expected of one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt, his wisdom was also extraordinary. Indeed, for your action of letting Chaldea go, I would like to express my gratitude. There's no need for that. It's just that I'm slightly interested in the Master of Chaldea. Ramses II rejected Wu Ming's gratitude. In response, Wu Ming smiled. If it's a kind interest, that's fine, but, as Wu Ming spoke, magic surged around him. If it's a malicious interest, I won't sit back and watch your interest hurt Tachika, Sun King. Wu Ming's expression instantly became serious as he stared at Ramses II, as if he would attack at any moment. Humph. Dragon of origin, are you threatening me? Ramses II wasn't a mild-tempered person after all. In the face of Wu Ming's threatening words, he was naturally a little angry. I wouldn't dare. Tachika is like family to me. I think protecting family is something that everyone, even the king, wants to do no matter what. Although Wu Ming's words were reasonable, but Wu Ming's words reminded Ramses II of his beloved wife and the eldest son that she gave birth to but died of illness. Humph. I don't want to treat the dragon of origin as a glib talker. You're here for the Holy Grail, right? Ramses II changed the topic again. That's right. Wu Ming nodded without hesitation. Seeing that Ramses II was speechless and changed the topic after being targeted by his words, Wu Ming also changed the topic. The Holy Grail is needed to repair the singularity. As long as the Holy Grail doesn't exist in this singularity, the era will slowly be repaired. However, Ramses II scoffed at Wu Ming's words. Humph. You were King Arthur's knight. Although I don't know what the White King wants to do, I know one thing. After the Holy Grail is recovered, the singularity will never be properly repaired. Wu Ming frowned slightly. Ramses II didn't seem to be lying. Could it be that Artoria has some other plans? You should have seen the changes in this singularity. Even if the Holy Grail is recovered, before the singularity is completely repaired, if the Lion King wants to do something, the other party can do it. Ramses II's words made sense. Because the singularity collapsed more severely, after the Holy Grail was recovered, the self-repair of this singularity wasn't as fast as other singularities. If Artoria had any plans at that time, then this singularity was indeed likely to have an accident. To be more serious, this singularity was likely to directly, there's no doubt that it will collapse. Chapter 7:11. Ramses II expressed his thoughts on behalf of Wooming. Even if I don't do anything, the Lion King alone can definitely do it. Ramses II held his face with one hand and showed a happy smile. Don't think that Ramses II was amiable in front of Wooming. It would be a big mistake to think that he was not that strong. If Wooming only appeared as a Vilo-Saranth, he would have no problem protecting himself when facing Ramses II. But if that was the case, Wooming would definitely not be able to defeat Ramses II. In mythology, Vilo-Saranth was actually a suspected dragon-type knight who held another holy sword. Wooming was the strongest, but he could only reach the level of the current Lion King, and the current Lion King could only fight to a draw with Ramses II. Of course, there was a reason for this tie. Ramses II wasn't interested in the battle with the Lion King, and the Lion King chose to find another way because he couldn't take down Ramses II in a short time. This led to the current situation of a tie. This gave people the feeling that Ramses II had the upper hand. After all, the Lion King was the first to propose a peace treaty. However, to be able to be in a state of polar opposites with Ramses II was enough to show the Lion King's strength. Therefore, no one would gossip about it. Even if Ramses II was serious, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. That was the goddess Artoria. It would not be a problem to call her the goddess Lungaminid. Moreover, Artoria had anchors on both sides of the world. At the same time, it was her noble phantasm, the holy spear Lungaminid. Ramses II was very strong. This was true. His noble phantasm was the temple complex here. In the temple, Ramses II was invincible. What's more, he had moved the other buildings in the desert here. Needless to say, he was very powerful. However, in terms of attack, he was slightly weaker than Artoria. After all, Artoria's noble phantasm was the holy spear, which was an offensive noble phantasm. Although Ramses II's great temple was also offensive, it was nothing compared to the holy spear Lungaminiad. As the King of Kings, Ramses II was indeed very arrogant. However, his arrogance didn't mean that he was a fool. He was aware that his attack was weaker than his opponent's. However, thou need not worry that I will add fuel to the fire at that time. Although I act according to my mood, I will not do something like destroying mankind. These words changed Wooming's impression of Ramses II. No matter how willful he was, his duty to protect others would never change. It did not mean that the person who possessed the Holy Grail created by the demon god king was the source of the disturbance to the singularity. After all, if I don't have my people, who should I lead? Well, Wooming's impression of Ramses II returned. He was a willful king just like Gilgamesh. Before I came here, I went to the holy city and talked to my king. I don't think she is lying to me. Ignoring Ramses II's bad personality, Wooming expressed his personal opinion. So, I don't think she will destroy the singularity like you said. Artoria's plan was to preserve the purity of mankind. Whether it was Artoria, Gawain, or Guinevere, they all said so. Wooming did not think that they would work together to deceive him. And if the truth was as they said, there was no way to destroy the singularity. However, Ramses II had no reason to lie. No, it should be said that a person like Ramses II would not lie. Then, could it be that, Wooming suddenly thought of something? Could it be that Artoria didn't tell anyone or Wooming the real plan and was prepared to rely on her own strength to carry out the plan? And the implementation of Artoria's plan would lead to the destruction of the singularity as Ramses II said. If that was the case, why would Artoria lie to Wooming? This was also easy to explain. Artoria's body had matured, and because she had held the holy spear for a long time, she had been deified by the holy spear maiden. It was inevitable that her inner thoughts would change. Therefore, even if it was Wuming, who was the closest to her, it was a thing of the past. Thou art a smart man. I have made it so clear, so thou shouldst understand. Ramses II held his crooked head with one hand and tapped his throne with the other. Indeed, Ramses II had made it clear. You're right. However, all of this is just a guess. Wuming looked at Ramses II without the slightest hesitation and wasn't affected by his words. He. Ha 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 ha. Ramses II burst into laughter. Not bad at all. As expected of the dragon of origin. My conversation with thee was subpar, but I am quite satisfied. After laughing, Ramses II nodded in satisfaction. He didn't know if it was Wuming's illusion, but Wuming felt that there was something wrong with Ramses II's hand holding his head. Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about these messy and unrealistic things. Then, can you give me the Holy Grail? Wuming went straight to the point. Fortunately, Gadotsi and the others weren't around. Otherwise, they would be shocked. After all, how could they give something to someone so directly? However, a golden light flashed before Wuming's eyes and he caught it subconsciously. Wuming took a closer look. It was a golden cup. The Holy Grail. This thing isn't of much use to me. If thou wants it, then take it. Thank you. Wuming thanked him and put away the Holy Grail. With this, Wuming finally understood. Ramses II had never treated anyone as an enemy. As the pharaoh who ruled over thousands of people, the king of gods, and the king of kings, other than himself and the people he acknowledged, everyone else was equal. There was no such thing as enemies or non-enemies. Therefore, Ramses II fought with the Lion King calmly. After the other party proposed a peace treaty, Ramses II agreed without hesitation. And Gadotsi was able to leave the desert so smoothly because of Ramses II's indulgence. It was also because of this that he gave the Holy Grail to Wuming. What a willful king. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Boom. Chapter 7:12. Boom. The sound of explosions continued to come from the outside. Even the hall where Ramses II and Wuming were in shook faintly. Ramses II chuckled and looked at Wuming. That's thy kin. The son of the sky seems to be fighting with the other party. After all, this was Ramses II's territory and the temple complex. He had great control over the surroundings, so even if he was in the temple, he could still see what was happening outside. Hearing Ramses II's words, Wuming thought to himself, as expected. Even if Ramses II didn't say anything, Wuming knew that it was definitely Jillian who was causing trouble. Although the magic link wasn't connected, Wuming didn't mean that Wuming wasn't in the same state as his servant. Wuming felt it very clearly. Jillian's magic power was being consumed, and she was most likely releasing Skystrike. I'm a fool to expect her to be honest alone. Wuming sighed and shook his head helplessly. I owe you a favor, Wuming said and stood up. Giving him the Holy Grail for free was already a great favor. In addition, Wuming's people were causing trouble outside. In any case, Wuming was in the wrong. As Wuming stood up, a black-purple ripple appeared beside Wuming. Oh, spatial magic, Ramses II said with interest. It's not spatial magic, just a little trick. Wuming shook his head. Then, I'll take my leave first. Wuming said and walked into the portal. The black-purple ripple swallowed Wuming's body and then disappeared. Ramses II looked at the place where Wuming disappeared and closed his eyes. Where's the root dragon? Ramses II said with a chuckle. It was unknown whether it was mockery or admiration. Outside the temple, a black-purple portal appeared in the sky and Wuming's figure appeared. As long as Wuming had been to a place without restrictions, he could use the portal to quickly move. Because of the advance notice, Ramses II temporarily opened up space authority to Wuming, so Wu-Ming could teleport in Ramses II's temple. Using telekinesis to float in the air, Wu-Ming looked down. Jillian held a purple scythe condensed from magic and slaughtered a large group of Sphinx. Jillian's scythe was like a wheat harvester, harvesting the Sphinx and releasing energy pillars from time to time, which caused the earth rumbled. The energy pillars were simply magic power released by Jillian in the form of a pillar. There was no fancy stuff. But because of the purity of the energy pillars and Jillian's reckless use, Wu-Ming felt the tremors and Jillian's wanton release of magic power. Ha 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 ha. Come and kill. Ha 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 ha. Jillian laughed maniacally as she killed, as if she had entered a state of madness. The Sphinx seemed to be endless. They kept surging out of the sand and charged at Jillian. However, even if Jillian was in a frenzy, her nature as of a weapon would not change. Using her wings and her petite body, Gopral jumped up and down among the Sphinxes. These 3-meter-tall Sphinxes were unable to catch Gopral. They couldn't even catch a single feather of hers. Instead, the Sphinx were cut into several pieces by Jillian's scythe and turned into pure magic power that dissipated. In addition to the frenzied Jillian and the resolute Sphinx, Wu-Ming also saw another figure behind the Sphinx army, Pharaoh Nitornus. The Sphinx army seemed to have been summoned by Nitornus. However, Nitornus would cast a few magic spells on Jillian from time to time. There were also attacks like Mummy's Claw and Sacred Beetle's Charge, but these attacks and magic spells had no effect on Jillian without exception. Basically, these attacks were either deflected by Jillian's scythe or dodged by Jillian agilely. After that, Nitornus seemed to have given up and focused on summoning the Sphinx army. Sacred Beetles, Mummies, Sphinx army, Wu-Ming could not help but ridicule Nitornus. Nitornus was really like a summoner. Like a summoner, Nitornus held the staff in her hand and constantly released magic power on the ground. It seemed that these endless Sphinx were summoned by Nitornus. If Ramses II authorized it, then it would be easy for Nitornus to summon the endless Sphinx army in the desert where the shrine was located. Giliel, on the other hand, seemed to have been dominated by madness. She didn't care about Nitocris, the summoner, at the back at all. Instead, she threw herself into the endless swarm of Sphinxes. However, in Wu-Ming's opinion, it was very likely that Gopral didn't attack Nitocris because she was in a berserk state. After all, if Nitornus was defeated, the Sphinx army was likely to disappear. In that case, Jillian would not be able to enjoy the fun of killing. But even if Gopral didn't attack Nitocris, she wouldn't be able to enjoy the fun of the battle anymore. Why? Because Wu-Ming was here. Calm down, Jillian. Wu-Ming's voice came into Jillian's ears, which made Jillian stunned. Since Jillian and Wu-Ming signed a dependent contract, Jillian became Wu-Ming's dependent. Although Wu-Ming could make those who surrendered to him and became his dependent completely obey him, it was a bit cruel for those who volunteered to become Wu-Ming's dependent. Volunteering represented trust in Wu-Ming, and if Wu-Ming did that, he would fail to live up to the trust of his dependents, so Wu-Ming would never do that. However, authority was authority. As mentioned before, the dependent authority could make Wu-Ming's dependents subtly change their minds, making them loyal to Wu-Ming from the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, even if Wu-Ming did not use coercive orders, Wu-Ming's dependents would have a feeling of being unable to disobey Wu-Ming's orders. Jillian was like that now. Because she heard Wu-Ming's words, she subconsciously paused for a moment. It was precisely because of this critical pause that the Sphinx army swarmed in and buried Jillian. Chapter 713. Sky Strike. Suddenly, a voice that sounded like an incantation came from the Sphinx army that had buried Jillian. In an instant, the Sphinx army stopped moving as if someone had pressed the pause button. Boom! Immediately after, a violent explosion erupted at the location where Gopral was engulfed by the Sphinx army. What? Nitoris, who was at the back of the Sphinx army, was shocked when she saw this. She did not expect the hot-tempered guy to have such a trick up his sleeve. Blue mana exploded in a semicircle and spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed. The earth seemed to have been plowed to one side, and the blue magic explosion directly annihilated a layer of earth. The explosion destroyed the earth, causing the earth to shake even more violently than the earthquake that Wooming felt just now. At the edge of the explosion, soil splashed everywhere, and in the next second, the splashed soil was absorbed by the continuous explosion, following in the footsteps of the former. All the sphinx that were affected by the blue magic explosion were destroyed without exception. Boom! 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 Every sphinx that was caught in the blast exploded in loud explosions. The sphinx army was dying at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even the Taurus was a little flustered by this sudden event. Wah! Wah! Affected by the earthquake, Natoris couldn't help but take 2 steps back. She propped her scepter on the ground. Naturally, the summoning of the Sphinx army was interrupted. Meanwhile, Giliel's Skystrike had wiped out the Sphinx army. As Gopril was distracted by Wooming's words, the Sphinx army swarmed forward, which made Gopril's Skystrike more convenient. All in all, it was a great victory for Jillian. Nidicol's came to her senses and looked in Jillian's direction with resentment. Giliel's eyes were red as she smiled cruelly at Natokri's. Her pure white wings, which hadn't been stained by the battle, suddenly flapped and Giliel charged towards Natokri's. Damn it! Natoris gnashed her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. After witnessing Jillian's strength, she was fully aware that she couldn't last more than 1 round against her. In Natoris's eyes, Jillian was a weapon born for battle. She was just an unqualified pharaoh, so how could she possibly defeat such a monster? That's all I can do. Natoris stood up with her scepter and made up her mind. She was ready to use her precious artifact. Although Giliel would most likely die if she used that noble artifact, if she didn't use it, the next one to die would most likely be her, Nidicol's. After all, to deal with such a monster, if she did not use her relic, she would not even have a way to self-destruct. It's about time to stop, Jillian. At this moment, Wooming's voice resounded through the sky. As if afraid that Jillian couldn't hear him, Wooming's voice wasn't soft this time. It wasn't soft to the point that Natoris heard it. Lord Villo. Natoris was shocked. It was reasonable for Natoris to be shocked. After all, Natoris was going to kill Jillian, and Jillian was Wooming's subordinate. This was no less than killing her knight in front of the Lion King. How could Nidicol's not be startled by this? Of course, if she was judged to have failed, it could only be considered an attempt. After all, Natoris had yet to make her move. Although Natoris didn't make her move, Jillian didn't stop moving. Although Jillian heard Wooming's words and lowered her speed subconsciously, she didn't stop completely. Jillian still flew toward Natoris. It was apparent that Jillian was affected by the berserk state. Wooming, who had been watching from the side for a while, naturally noticed it. That was why he didn't intend to use words to stop Jillian. Clank. The sound of chains slithering entered Jillian's ears. Several golden ripples appeared behind Wooming and the chains within the ripples shot toward Jillian. Jillian didn't turn around to observe. She was confident that she could dodge the chains by relying on her voice and instincts. But how could Wooming let her do as she wished? Boom! Jillian came to a halt as though she had crashed into an invisible wall. At the same time, she let out a muffled groan. Jillian's scarlet eyes that gradually lost her rationality revealed a trace of doubt. Feeling the strange tightness in her body, she looked at her body. Silver whitish chains appeared in the purplish-black ripples around Jillian out of nowhere. This was the combination of Wooming's teleportation gate and pseudo-sky lock. As it was easy to use, Wooming had used it more than once. The pseudo-sky lock bound Jillian's limbs, body, and wings. Not only that, but the chains also extended and wrapped around Jillian like living creatures. Gradually, Gopril was entangled by the pseudo-heavenly shackles until she was like a mummy. Her exposed skin was almost completely entangled by the chains and only a small part of her skin was revealed. Jillian subconsciously released her magical powers to break free from the chains. In the end, she discovered that only the exposed skin released a trace of magical powers. The magical powers that she released basically disappeared like air in a leaking balloon when they came into contact with the chains. My magical powers were absorbed. This was Jillian's last thought before she lost her vision. Shortly after, her head was wrapped by the snake-like chains. At the same time, she closed her eyes and fell into a coma. At that moment, Jillian's entire body, including her head, was wrapped in layers of silver-whitish chains. At that moment, Jillian, who had lost an absolute part of her rationality, was subdued. On the other side, at Wu Ming's location, Wu Ming's hands were wrapped in a large number of chains. The chains that extended from Wu Ming's arms entered the purplish-black ripples of the teleportation gate. Wu Ming didn't move at all. He only created some pseudo-sky locks and used the teleportation gate to launch a surprise attack on Jillian. As for Jillian's magical powers being absorbed, that wasn't right. Jillian's magical powers should have been annihilated. Chapter 714. As mentioned before, Wu Ming cheated by bringing his noble phantasm, 12 avatars of authority, to this spiritual base. However, the ability of these 12 avatars could only be used once in this spiritual base. Once one of them was used, there would be one less avatar, just like a consumable item. Wu Ming summoned Skywing and Abendheim using the 8th avatar, so Wu Ming only had 11 avatars left. When Wu Ming made the pseudo-heavenly lock, he deliberately used one of the remaining 11 avatars. Wu Ming added the 5th avatar's annihilation characteristic to the pseudo-heavenly lock, which made the person bound by the pseudo-heavenly lock be annihilated. Of course, Wu Ming could choose what to annihilate, the other party, whether it was the body or the magical power. It was up to Wu Ming's precise control. Wu Ming chose the magical power released from the surface of Giliel's skin to annihilate, so Giliel's body was not damaged. However, this was not without drawbacks. The pseudo-heavenly lock with the annihilation characteristic could no longer retain the ability to restrain divinity. Originally, Wu Ming could use high-grade items to create the pseudo-heavenly lock with the effect of restraining divinity, but when the avatar of annihilation was added to the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock, the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock were annihilated. Or it should be said that the ability of annihilation annihilated the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock. And because there was only one characteristic of the heavenly lock, that was, the higher the divinity of the person bound, the tighter the heavenly lock would bind. Therefore, after the annihilation characteristic was added, the restraining divinity characteristic disappeared. But that didn't matter. After all, the pseudo-heavenly lock could be recreated. On the contrary, the chains with the annihilation characteristic could only be found by chance. After all, Wu Ming's annihilation avatar had been used, and there were only 10 avatars left. Although the 12 incarnations had become a consumable item, Razin still had to use it. After all, if he didn't use it, why would Wu Ming bother to bring the 12 incarnations here? Controlling the pseudo-sky lock, or rather the annihilation lock, Wu Ming sent the unconscious Jillian into the portal. Jillian's unconsciousness wasn't caused by Wu Ming's annihilation lock. It was only because Jillian had overused her mana. Generally speaking, excessive mana consumption would only cause one to become extremely weak. Worse, one might not even be able to maintain a physical body and be forced to enter a spiritual state. The main reason why Jillian was unconscious was that Wu Ming had forcefully stopped her while she was flying at high speed. When she released her mana, it was instantly annihilated, causing her to fall unconscious. While Gopril was unconscious, Wu Ming had already connected to Gopril's spirit base and started providing her with magic power. Although Wu Ming had consumed a lot of mana when summoning the Skywing species and Abante, Wu Ming could still provide for a servant. After Gopril was completely engulfed by the black-purple teleportation gate, Silent Cry landed. "I'm sorry, Pharaoh Nitornus, I didn't manage my subordinates well." Wu Ming, who came in front of Nitornus, said to Nitornus. In any case, it could be seen from Jillian's final impact that she had the desire to kill Nitornus. Wuming also saw that Nitornis was ready to release her noble phantasm. If Wuming didn't stop her, either one of Jillian and Nitornis would leave, or both of them would leave together. After all, it was very likely that when Nitornis released her noble phantasm to take Jillian away, Jillian also took the opportunity to take Nitornis away. In short, they would die together. If that happened, there would be a rift between him and Ramses II. If he came to the other party's territory and his subordinates died together with the other party's subordinates, regardless of whether Wuming had malicious intentions or not, he would become enemies with the other party. Wuming would think of the worst-case scenario. After all, there was no harm in preparing for a rainy day. But fortunately, all of this was stopped by Wuming. "You're exaggerating, Sir Villo." Nitornis stood firm and shook her head. "By the way, do you know what's going on? Why did Jillian fall into such a state of madness?" Although Wuming knew that Jillian wasn't honest, Jillian shouldn't have fallen into madness so easily. Although it was also possible that Jillian wanted to play around and ended up screwing up. "I don't really understand." Nitornis shook her head. Immediately after, Nitornis told Wuming everything she knew. After Nitornis sent Wuming to the main hall where Ramses II was, she left the main hall and went outside. Then, she saw Jillian teasing the Sphinx group responsible for guarding the place. Nitornis was dissatisfied and stopped Jillian with words. In the end, Jillian stopped teasing the Sphinx group and started chatting with Nitornis. Although Nitocris was rather surprised, after exchanging names with Gopril and attempting to chat with her, she found that Gopril wasn't a bad person. Thus, the two of them began to converse. Although they might develop into enemies because of their respective masters, neither Nitornis nor Jillian was worried. Once they became enemies, they would go all out. Be it Nitornis's loyalty to Ramses II or Jillian's loyalty to Wuming, they wouldn't let the two of them stop just because they had a good chat. Although it sounded cruel, that was the truth. Afterward, when they talked about the sandstorm they encountered when they first entered the desert, Nitornis said, "I did it." After that, Giliel smiled and began her attack on Nitocris. It had to be said that Nitornis was still too naive. Jillian was clearly tricking her. Jillian was rather concerned about the unkillable sandstorm. Although the Sky Wings were not as vengeful as the forest goblins, Jillian was not the kind of person who wouldn't get back at someone for smashing her place. Jillian attacked Nitornis, but Nitornis found it rather baffling because she didn't know what she had said wrong. However, since the other party had attacked, Nitornis would not passively take the beating. As a pharaoh, Nitornis naturally used magic and summoned servants to attack, but as mentioned before, whether it was the scarabs, mummies, or magic, they all had little effect on Jillian. Only a large creature like the Sphinx could slightly restrain Jillian. Thus, Nitornis began to summon the Sphinx frantically. Wuming knew what happened next. In other words, Jillian gradually lost her rationality in the battle. Chapter 7:15. Although she was furious that Nitocris had used the sandstorm to toy with her, she was in no hurry to kill Nitocris because she wanted to play with her. Instead, she fought with Nitocris' summoned creatures in an attempt to find joy in the slaughter. Although Nitocris was a pharaoh and had a powerful noble phantasm, if Gypril assassinated her or launched a surprise attack, Nitocris might not be able to use her noble phantasm. After all, Gypril's physical attributes were very powerful. Based on the servant panel, it was the attributes of a top-notch servant. Therefore, Gypril, who did not directly kill Nitocris, actually wanted to play with Nitocris to avenge the shame of the sandstorm. As a result, when Gypril fought with the Sphinx summoned by Nitocris, Gypril was gradually affected by Berserk to the extent that she did not even listen to Wuming's words. Although it was not clear whether this was the case or not, Wuming felt that his judgment was correct. In short, in fact, Gypril reaped what she sowed. Wuming's tone was somewhat helpless, but things had already happened, and Wuming could only smile. That. Sir Villo. Nitocris looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. If you have something to say, just say it. After all, this time we are in the wrong. Wuming calmly signaled Nitocris to speak her mind. Yes. Nidicles nodded. Although I am not a member of your camp, if possible, please do not punish Miss Gypril. If I understand correctly, are you pleading for her? Wooming glanced at Nidicles in surprise. Nidicles' pleading for Gypril was beyond Wooming's expectations. That's right. Miss Gillian and I hit it off quite well. I feel quite happy chatting with her. Although I don't know why Miss Gillian would suddenly attack me, I think it should be because Miss Gillian was affected by the berserk skill. This made Wooming even more astonished. Even now, Natakri still couldn't tell that Gillian was only pretending to chat with her. Her true goal was to get information out of her. Can I ask why? Wooming asked. Nidicles hesitated. Seeing such a Nidicles, Wooming quickly waved his hand. Of course, if it's inconvenient, you don't have to say it. However, Nidicles shook her head. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Then, as if she had made up her mind, Nidicles began to explain. Lord Varen, I'm sure you already know that I became a pharaoh because I was pushed to that position by someone else. To put it simply, I'm just a puppet. Nidicles' eyes wavered as if she was recalling the events of her life. But even so, I'm prepared to become a pharaoh, the son of God, the king of gods. But the price is that I don't have any close friends. As she spoke, Nitornis's eyes dimmed. After being hastily pushed to the position of pharaoh, her original friends were probably gradually estranged from her because of the difference between human and God. But I still have my brother. I can chat with him in my free time and relax my tense heart. Just that alone is enough for me. Thinking of her family, Nidicles' eyes showed a trace of gentleness. But my only family member, my brother, was branded with a groundless crime. He was murdered by those who pushed me to the position of pharaoh and treated me as a puppet. Nidicles' tone carried a trace of grief and indignation. They even deliberately let me know of this news and talked about it in front of me as if they were showing off. Because she was a puppet, a bird in a cage, there was no need to avoid it. Because she was a puppet, a fish in a pond, there was no need to fear it. And because she was a puppet, something in the palm of her hand, there was no need to be vigilant. And the result was, I killed them, said Natakris, neither sad nor happy. They never thought that I would attack them. I still remember their expressions of despair before they were drowned. Although Natakris's words were cruel, there was no complacency on her face from her successful revenge. Because it was meaningless. Why was it meaningless? It was because, my family member can't be revived. Even if I cut them into pieces, he still can't be revived. Nidicles gripped the scepter tightly as if it was going to break. I lost my family member who understood me. I also thought that my actions of murder disqualified me from the position of pharaoh. In the end, I chose to kill myself. Nidicles finished speaking. During this time, Wooming did not say a word. Since Nidicles had spoken to this extent, Wooming more or less understood. She was willing to gamble her life for her family because her family understood her. Whether it was because they understood that Nidicles was her family or because she was Nidicles' family, it was not important. What was important was that she no longer had a close friend. After talking with Gopril for a while, Nidicles clearly felt that Gopril could understand her and could become her close friend. This was normal. After all, Nidicles had only lived for a short period of time and did not have many close friends. Moreover, after becoming a follower, she had been staying with Ramses II. To Nidicles, Ramses II was someone who required respect and loyalty, so they could not become close friends. It could be said that Gopril was the first woman other than Chaldea who could become Nidicles' close friend. It was because of this that Nidicles would cover up Chaldea's group who had only saved her life. It was also because of this that Nidicles did not use a killing move on Gopril from the start. On the other hand, the reason why Gopril didn't attack Nitornis directly was most likely because she had a good impression of her, so she decided to tease her. As for killing Nidicles later on, Wooming guessed that it was because she was under the influence of berserk. Nidicles was prepared to use a noble artifact on Gopril in the end because she was at her wit's end. As mentioned before, if the two of them became enemies, she would definitely not hold back. Nittacles could not die yet. At the very least, she could not die in such a sullen manner. At the very least, she had to be loyal to Ramses II. As for whether or not Giliel and Nitocris had taken a liking to each other, they could only wait until Giliel woke up to find out. Although Miss Gopral had the intention to scout for information in the beginning, I could sense that she was indeed very happy during the conversation. That wasn't an act, Nitoris exonerated Gopral. If possible, please don't punish her. After saying that, Nittacles had a please look on her face. Wuming could only smile helplessly. Don't worry, I won't punish her. Chapter 7:16. I don't have the habit of punishing my subordinates, so even if you say so, I won't punish her. Wuming's words made Nitocris calm down. Thank you, Sir Villo. However, Wuming was puzzled. I remember you said that you knew that Jillian was chatting with you to get information from you, right? Nitocris nodded with a smile. Sir Villo, you can't be thinking of me as a fool, right? I'm a pharaoh after all, how can I not have some wisdom? After all, when Nitocris drowned those in power who murdered her brother, she used a scheme. In other words, actually, I'm very smart, Wuming smiled helplessly. Although he was helpless, Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's about time. My purpose of coming here has been achieved. I'm going to leave now. He got the Holy Grail and didn't fight with Ramses II. Although Jillian had a fight with Nitocris because of her berserk state, nothing happened in the end. So Wuming was ready to leave. Ah. By the way, Sir Villo, I have something to report. When she heard that Wuming was leaving, Nitocris instantly remembered something. What's the matter? Wuming looked at Nitocris puzzledly. He shouldn't have any other connection with this place. It's like this, Sir Osmendes captured a knight from the Holy City not long ago. Knight? Wuming was stunned at first, then he thought of something. It can't be Tristan, right? That's a knight who uses a magic bow. Well, it's really Tristan. I have to say that this guy is really unlucky. He was just sent to the desert by Wuming to be on standby and gather information, but he was captured not long after. However, if it was really Tristan, why couldn't Wuming sense Tristan's location? After all, Wuming was currently Tristan's temporary master. Lord Osmendes inadvertently noticed that someone was scouting for information about the terrain nearby, so he directly captured that person and imprisoned him under the pyramid, isolating him. This finally resolved Wuming's doubts. It turned out that the barrier had cut off his perception of Tristan. And because Tristan didn't leave, the contract between him and Wuming was still intact. That was why Wuming didn't realize that Tristan was captured. Lord Osmendes told me to hand him over to you if you want to leave. Hold on. Wuming suddenly spoke, interrupting Nitocris. I don't want it anymore. Let him continue to stay under the pyramid. Wuming's words stunned Nitornis. Why, did he not want it? Thank you Ramses II for taking care of Tristan for me. Remember to thank him for me. I'll take my leave first. What a joke. How could Wuming not know what kind of person Tristan was? If he were to return to Artoria, then he would be a great help. It was better to let Tristan stay here. After Wuming finished speaking, the dark purple teleportation door opened. Without waiting for Nitornis to react, Wuming plunged into it. Then, the dark purple teleportation door closed. Okay. Only then did Nitoris react, and she nodded subconsciously. However, Wuming had already left. In the lower level of the pyramid, in the barrier prison, Tristan sat on the stone bed. He looked at his empty hands because his weapons were confiscated and sighed. Sigh. I'm so sad. On the ground that seemed to have been scorched by flames, the huge floating tree with crystal leaves and a scarlet trunk, a Bondiheim, floated in the sky. The crystal-like leaves continued to sway with the airflow in the sky, refracting the sunlight in all directions. The huge tree that was like a floating island gave off a harmless feeling under the sunlight. However, under this seemingly peaceful scene, there was a hidden killing intent. The skywing species had entered a standby state. As the existence of the skywing species, home, Abanti's responsibility was not small. Although Abanti usually looked harmless, that was only because the skywing species were there, so there was no need for it to do anything. Now, Abanti, who shouldered the heavy responsibility of protecting the skywing species, was in a state of high alert. In the sky above Abanti, a dark purple ripple suddenly appeared. Accompanied by the sound of chains, an angel-like figure fell. It was the unconscious Giliel. When Abanti saw that the newcomer was someone he knew, some of the tiny tree trunks on his body instantly lengthened and extended, catching Jillian. Immediately after, another dark purple ripple appeared, and Wuming's figure appeared in the sky. Seeing that the master it was loyal to had arrived, Abanti controlled many red branches to extend over. Although it knew that its master could fly, it still had to show some sincerity. Wuming gave Abanti a lot of face, free-falling onto the red branches that Abanti had extended over. Standing on Abanti's branches, Wuming arrived on a platform on Abanti's body as if he was taking an elevator. Beside him, Giliel was also placed on the ground by Abanti. The scarlet branches retreated like tentacles, leaving only Wuming and the unconscious Giliel on the platform. Abanti, send Giliel to her room. No one responded to Wuming, and Abanti used its actions to prove its obedience. The platform beneath Goprel seemed to have melted, and Goprel slowly sank down. This was Abanti's ability, so Wuming did not panic. Giliel completely sank into the softened platform. In just a few seconds, Giliel disappeared, and the platform returned to its original state. A very convenient ability, Wuming commented. It had to be said that the Skywings had truly made the right choice in choosing to live on Abanti's body. Abanti's mobile, multi-purpose aerial fortress was truly amazing. However, looking at Abanti at his feet, Wuming suddenly remembered something. I seem to have been tricked by Ramses II. It had to be said that it was Ramses II who had launched an attack on Wuming's side first. Wuming had gone this time to get back at him and take the Holy Grail. However, after busying himself for so long, Wuming ended up owing the other party a favor. Although Ramses had launched that attack to determine whether Wuming's faction had the right to exist, it was still the other party who had made the first move. Furthermore, Wuming had been blinded by the Holy Grail. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Wuming shrugged. After all, there was nothing for Ramses II to do. After dealing with the problem of Artoria, he would hand over the Holy Grail to Gadotsi. Let's go take a look at the situation of the Skywings. Abanti understood, and the platform under Wuming's feet softened. Wuming's body slowly sank as if he had sunk into a swamp. Chapter 717. To be honest, ever since Wuming became Abanti's master, he had not entered Abanti's body to take a look. Walking in the corridor, Wuming looked around curiously. This isn't any different from other ordinary buildings. Wuming had thought that Abanti's body, which was classified as a living creature, would be closer to the style of a living creature. He did not expect it to be similar to the internal buildings of steel and stone. If there was a difference, it would be that Abanti's building was extremely luxurious. Speaking of which, it seems like the Skywings' rooms don't have doors. Just as Wuming finished speaking, the corridor changed. The walls of the corridor cracked like the walls of a shoddy house, and doors opened on the smooth walls. In addition, there was a small window on each door. Needless to say, this was definitely done by Abanti for Wuming to make it easier for him to check the condition of the Skywings. But, I can't just lie on the windows of those doors and look, can I? Wuming said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Hearing Wuming's words, almost all the doors disappeared, except for one door. Since Abanti had left this door, it must have been a signal for Wuming to go in. Without saying anything else, Wuming walked to the only door, pushed it open, and walked in. What greeted him was a monitoring room full of technology. The room was neither big nor small. It was full of modern-style floors and walls, as well as a console with a large number of buttons, keyboards, and control handles. Large, technology-like screens surrounded the room and stuck to the walls. To be honest, Wu-Ming was stunned. Abanti was clearly a moving fortress of magic, but it had created a technology-style control room for Wu-Ming. How could Wu-Ming not be stunned? But this is indeed much more convenient. After coming to his senses, Wu-Ming was no longer surprised that Abanti could create such a room. According to Wu-Ming's understanding, it seemed that the servants would gain modern knowledge when they were summoned. Although Wu-Ming was not sure if the servant summoned in the singularity would gain modern knowledge, seeing how Abanti had so skillfully created such a technology-style room, it probably had already gained modern knowledge. I hope it's that convenient to use, Wu-Ming said as he walked to the console. After all, Wu-Ming was not sure if Abanti could create such a sophisticated instrument just by relying on the modern knowledge given by the summons. The whole room was quite simple. Apart from the big screen and console, there was nothing else. The console, of course, was located in the middle of the room, facing the door. Wu-Ming walked to the back of the control panel and sat on the bright and clean sofa chair. It's quite comfortable. Wu-Ming patted the armrests on both sides of the sofa and nodded in satisfaction. Then, turn the big screen and let me take a look. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, Abanti began to move. Buzz, one by one, the big screens changed from a dark state to a dazzling blue light. Immediately afterward, the buttons, and joysticks on the console also emitted light. Well, it looks like it. Wu-Ming nodded. He didn't expect Abanti to be able to restore this sense of technology. It was quite smart. Immediately afterward, a virtual screen generated by magic appeared in a folded state on the console in front of Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming was stunned, but Wu-Ming's heart was not calm. Is that it? The big screen on the wall lit up with a blue light and nothing else was displayed. It was as if it had crashed. The device on the console emitted light only to provide a magic outlet for the magic screen, so that the magic screen could be displayed. There was no other use at all. Except for the comfortable chair Wu-Ming was sitting in, everything else was just a fake on the outside. I should have thought of it a long time ago. Even if it grants the servant modern knowledge, how can it be possible to tell the servant about the sophisticated computer system? Silent Wonder sighed self-deprecatingly, then smiled helplessly. If the servant was given such a level of knowledge, then the servant's summoning system was really terrifying. In other words, Abanti made this seemingly high-tech monitoring room, but in fact, it was just drawing a ladle according to the gourd. There was no inside of the gourd at all. There was only the ladle outside. In fact, what Abanti used was still magic, not technology. Forget it, it's fine as long as it can be used. Wu-Ming didn't care much. He was just shocked by what Abant, a guy with a trace of a natural attribute, did. Without saying anything else, Wu-Ming looked at the control console, at the big virtual screen condensed from magic in front of him. Each virtual screen was about 3 meters long and square. The big screen was divided into countless smaller screens, and each screen showed the monitoring situation of the rooms of the sky wings. Because there were so many sky wings, these screens were stacked together. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and Abanti knowingly helped Wu-Ming separate the big screens. The virtual screens were spread out in front of Wu-Ming, forming a wall. Although it looked a little dazzling, it did indeed report the situation of every skywing to Wu-Ming. Everyone is sleeping soundly. He quickly glanced at the skywing species on the screen. They were all sleeping soundly. Wu-Ming also saw Gopril on the screen. Unlike the other skywings, she was not floating in the room but lying on her bed. After all, the other skywings were on standby, while she was unconscious. Although Wu-Ming had a way to quickly wake Gopril up, but I'll just let her sleep. In any case, I'll just keep supplying her with magic, and she'll be able to recover. It was just that it would be a little slower. Aside from the sky wings, the big screen also showed the monitoring of the corridor. Looking at the monitoring, Wu-Ming suddenly felt that something was wrong with the big screen. He seemed to have seen a black shadow flash across the corridor. He checked the big screen again, trying to find something wrong, but no matter how carefully he looked, he couldn't see anything different. Was it my imagination? Wu-Ming frowned. No, that can't be it. It can't be your imagination. Wu-Ming had always trusted his sixth sense, and every time he followed it, it was always correct. Wu-Ming was sure that something had gotten into a Bondi's body. Furthermore, that black shadow he had just caught gave Wu-Ming a sense of danger. A powerful stealth ability, a strange movement technique, and something that even made Wu-Ming feel a sense of danger. Combined with this singularity, Wu-Ming could only think of one person. First Hassan. Wu-Ming had just finished speaking when he saw a sword flash coming at him. Chapter 718. Wu-Ming instinctively tried to dodge, only to realize that it was futile. I can't dodge it? Wu-Ming was alarmed. The sword flash was clearly not fast, but Wu-Ming had the feeling that he could not dodge it. Squelch. With a squelch, half of Wu-Ming's arm was chopped off, and blood gushed out. However, Wu-Ming only frowned. Without saying a word, he raised his other arm and punched behind him. Boom! Along with the golden light, the fist collided with the dark and gloomy 1-meter-tall skull shield. The powerful force caused the atmosphere to tremble. At this moment, Abant also reacted. This was its body, and it did not even know that someone had snuck in. This was a great humiliation. In an instant, countless branch-like tentacles pierced towards the place where Wu-Ming had attacked like sharp swords. Whoosh! The sword flashed, and Abant's branch-like tentacles were shattered one by one as if they were dead. At this moment, the sky wings in their rooms were also awakened by the battle between Wu-Ming, Abant, and the enemy. In their respective rooms, they suddenly opened their eyes. The golden pupils of the sword and the shield instantly turned into scarlet pupils of the sword talisman. Like ghosts, the sky wings collectively passed through the illusory walls of their rooms and headed in Wu-Ming's direction. Because of the sky wings' ability to pass through walls, the walls were just a layer of colored air to them. Everyone, stop! Wu-Ming yelled at the air. Wu-Ming knew very well who the other party was. Apart from the first Hassan, Wu-Ming could not think of anyone else who could be the crown assassin's spirit base. Thus, the other party could not be dealt with by relying on numbers. Even if this number was supplemented by the sky wings, it would not be enough. Wu-Ming's order caused the sky wings, who had been rushing toward Wu-Ming, to collectively stop. Some of the sky wings had even entered Wu-Ming's room. Return to your rooms and wait for further orders, Wu-Ming said as he gave his second order. Whether it was the sky wings who had already reached Wu-Ming's room or the other sky wings who had not made it in time, they collectively bowed and left with their heads lowered. The sky wings retreated to their rooms, but they continued to stare at Wu-Ming's room with their scarlet eyes. Although Silent Wonder was very dissatisfied that the sky wings were berserkers, he had to admit that there was a benefit to berserker servants, and that was that they were exceptionally obedient. When Wu-Ming said everyone, stop, it naturally included Abendheim, so Abend did not attack again. First Hassan, you and I have nothing to do with each other, so why are you trying to assassinate me? Wu-Ming said in an unfriendly tone as he looked at the shadow where Wu-Ming had attacked. The entire room was enveloped by the light from the large screen, and only the corner behind Wu-Ming was dark. Do you have to be so obvious? Did you have to be so obvious? The reason it was a shadow was because Wu-Ming still could not see who the other party was. However, other than the mysterious first Hassan, who had such powerful stealth abilities and strength that could injure Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming could not think of anyone else. It was as if he had given up because he had not killed the enemy in one strike, or perhaps he had achieved his goal. The shadow in the corner dissipated, revealing a tall figure. He was over 2 meters tall and wore shabby dark armor. The armor's shoulders, elbows, knees, and even back had decorative barbs that pointed upward. He held a simple and worn-out greatsword in his right hand, and his left hand held a meter-tall shield that also had barbs. Most importantly, the other party's armor had a rather shabby cloak and a skull mask. If it was a mask, it would not be too accurate, because the other party's skull mask was more like a helmet than a mask. A skull with strange horns wrapped tightly around the other party's head. Although the area near the chin was not covered by the skull, what was revealed was darkness. Only the area around the eyes had a dark blue flame that looked like a soul fire burning dimly. With this skull face alone, Wuming was sure that the other party was indeed First Hassan, and it was definitely the First Hassan. Crack. 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 With a little cracking sound, the shield held by the First Hassan cracked and then shattered. The fragments turned into a black mist and entangled into the dark cloak behind the First Hassan. The First Hassan, who lost the shield in his left hand, chose to touch the tip of the greatsword to the ground and pressed the hilt of the greatsword with both hands as if he was leaning on a crutch. "Answer my question, First Hassan," Wuming repeated in a more unfriendly tone. Wuming was indeed easy to talk to, but this did not mean that Wuming would tolerate being cut by someone and losing an arm. Moreover, Wuming was not afraid of the crown servant. He had 12 incarnations. If Wuming wanted, he could make the First Hassan leave here. "The bell of thy evening has not rung, but thy destiny has deviated." An old and deep voice came from under the mask of the First Hassan. Wuming was dumbfounded. What is this? The bell of the evening did not ring. It should be saying that he should not die yet. Wuming felt like he was scolding himself, but it was the truth. "Then why did you come to cut me?" According to Wuming's knowledge, the First Hassan was the one who beheaded Hassan who had gone astray. Although it did not mean that the First Hassan would only attack Hassan, Wuming did not understand why the other party attacked him. The two had no interest disputes at all, and Wuming also saved the life of a Hassan. Could it be that the other party was here to thank him? However, this thank you gift was really too heavy, wasn't it? Also, what does deviated destiny mean? Is it possible that there is something that needs me to do, but I didn't do it? Even if it was a reminder, why did you have to cut me directly? The First Hassan had the ability to kill the opponent instantly. Wuming could also feel the power of instant death from the cut, but the cut on Wuming did not trigger the instant death effect at all. Wuming's body was 100% immune to such means, but this spiritual base was not immune. In other words, the First Hassan did not want to kill him at all. The destiny of the winged otherworlder and the behemoth floating in the mortal world is different. I want to silence it on behalf of God. The First Hassan spoke again. Wuming frowned. Is it because the skywing species and Abanti are not native residents of this world, so they were targeted by the First Hassan, and I was only forced to take a cut? Chapter 719. The skywings and Abondiheim were not products of this planet, which meant that they were actually stowaways. As the thugs of the restraining power, the crown servants were there to deal with these stowaways. However, with the relationship between Wuming and the restraining power, how could the restraining power attack Wuming? Furthermore, the First Hassan had aimed at Wuming, so Wuming did not understand what was going on. However, after hearing the First Hassan's next words, Wuming understood. However, the blade has already been unsheathed. There is no second strike. To put it simply, the First Hassan had let go of the skywings and Abondiheim. So, in other words, Wuming had taken the punishment on behalf of the skywings and Abanti. Wuming, who had figured it out, sighed, and the anger in his heart dissipated. Now, the world was in a state of burning humanity, and the restraining power, Alea, was definitely not in a good state. The First Hassan might have been sent out to help Chaldea save humanity. The First Hassan's mission was to find out about the abnormalities, and the skywings and Abanti, as stowaways, were definitely one of the abnormalities, which was the so-called violation of destiny. Destiny was an established fact. Originally, there were no such conspicuous existences like Abanti and the skywings in history, so this was considered a violation of destiny. Take the Lionheart King, who was currently in the Holy City, as an example. She had replaced the Lionheart King to rule the Holy City, which was considered a change of fate, and could also be considered as taking over the Lionheart King's destiny. Since Wu Ming's side was considered to have gone against the will of the heavens, then wouldn't Ramses II's side also be considered to have gone against the will of the heavens? That was very likely. Wu Ming recalled some details about Ramses II. When Ramses II and Wu Ming were talking, Ramses II had been holding his head, and his neck gave Wu Ming a feeling that something was wrong. He did not think much of it at first, but now that he thought about it, Wu Ming felt that something was wrong. Could it be that Ramses II had already been beheaded by the first Hassan, and it was even his head? After seeing the first Hassan's stealth and assassination ability, Wu Ming had no doubt that he could successfully infiltrate Ramses II's temple. The reason why Ramses II was not dead was probably due to the temple's blessing. The lunar residence, in that world, Wu Ming was Wu Ming's temple. Although the size of the temple wasn't large, Wu Ming couldn't be killed if he was inside the temple, just like how Ramses II couldn't be killed in his own temple. With this series of speculations, Wu Ming was now more and more suspicious of Ramses II, wondering if he had also been beheaded by the first Hassan. Ramses II did not die because of the temple, but why was Wu Ming fine after being beheaded by the first Hassan without the temple? Wu Ming's doubts were almost solved. It stood to reason that Wu Ming's spiritual base did not have the instant immunity effect of his root of origin. Even if his arm was cut off, from the point of instant death, he would die as long as he touched it. Therefore, Wu Ming should have left by now. But Wu Ming was fine. Wu Ming looked at his severed arm. The severed arm had turned into magic power and dissipated, and the wound on Wu Ming's severed arm had stopped bleeding, but that was not the point. The point was that Wu Ming did not feel any aura of death on his severed arm. Wu Ming could even use magic power to condense a new arm. Let's do it. Wu Ming thought so, and magic power surged at the severed arm. In just a few seconds, a new arm reappeared. Sure enough. Looking at his newly grown arm, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was surrounded by shadows. Is it the decision of the restraining power or your own will? Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan. Wu Ming's question was very simple. Did the restraining power give the order to be merciful, or did the first Hassan choose not to let Wu Ming leave? This is the instruction of the evening bell, and also my will. The instruction of the evening bell was definitely the restraining power. That was the difference. Ramses II's head was cut off. Thinking about it, the first Hassan did not use the instant death power when he attacked Ramses II. There were many ways to make a servant leave, such as lack of magic power, master leaving, shattering the heart, spirit core, and head, and so on. Generally speaking, as long as the servant's head was gone, even if the spirit core was intact, they would leave unless they had special abilities. This was the case for Ramses II. The great shrine of Ramses II allowed him to survive after his head was cut off and did not leave. However, this was also thanks to the first Hassan not using the instant death power, which allowed Ramses II to have the opportunity to use the great shrine to extend his life. The first Hassan, who believed in the saying, once the sword is out of the scabbard, there is no second sword, did not attack Ramses II again. On the other hand, Wu Ming remembered clearly that the first Hassan's attack was on his body. Because Wu Ming dodged, it led to Wu Ming's arm being cut off. Although cutting off the body was not much better than cutting off the head, one must know that compared to other parts of the body, it was the most difficult place to cut off. After all, the connection point between the arm, head, and other parts of the body was very small, so the first Hassan was actually just cutting off the head. He actually did not expect that Wu Ming could detect his attack and avoid it. Worthy of the name of the legendary dragon. The first Hassan thought so in his heart. On the other hand, Wu Ming was thinking, sure enough, it's good to have someone above you. Wu Ming silently nodded in his heart. In that case, I won't hold you responsible for trying to assassinate me, first Hassan, Wu Ming calmly said. Wu Ming had gotten the upper hand this time. The first Hassan definitely had not snuck in here for a while. If he had attacked Abant and the Sky Wings while Wu Ming was looking for Ramses II, they felt that there was no chance of survival and would have left. According to what the first Hassan had said, it was the first Hassan who had chosen to wait for Wu Ming to arrive before stabbing Wu Ming and letting go of the Sky Wings and Abant. Thinking about it this way, Wu Ming seemed to have to thank the first Hassan. This was too awkward. Even if the first Hassan had given Wu Ming face and only cut him once, having to say thank you after being cut was not something Wu Ming could do. As if seeing Wu Ming's concerns, the first Hassan directly spoke. I will remember in my heart that thou hast saved Smoky Drunk Hassan. Wu Ming was stunned. This was really a thank you gift, although this thank you gift was a little too much for Wu Ming to accept. I have one more thing, the first Hassan suddenly said. Chapter 720. The silver arm can't save the white man, you still need to save him. Wu Ming was taken aback, then frowned. White man? Silver arm? There was no doubt that these two were referring to two different people. As for the pure white man, Wu Ming could still guess who it was. It was the pure white Lion King who now occupied the holy city, Artoria Pendragon. It wasn't Wu Ming who thought so. Ramses II also called the Lion King Artoria, who was currently in the holy city that way. But who was the silver arm? Wu Ming didn't remember the silver arm among the people he knew, or was it someone Artoria knew? The people related to Artoria were only those, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and so on. But Wu Ming, as the person who accompanied Artoria for most of her life, was naturally familiar with the people Artoria was familiar with. But none of these people were related to the silver arm. Silver arm. 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 Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. From the information obtained by Wu Ming so far, only 3 Knights of the Round Table did not respond to Artoria's summon. Villo their answered, Galahad, and Bedivere. Villo was Wu Ming himself, so it was normal that he couldn't be summoned. Galahad was attached to Matthew, so naturally, he couldn't respond to the summon. Bedivere, who was quite loyal to Artoria, also didn't respond to Artoria's summon, which was undoubtedly a big doubt. And Bedivere had a big characteristic as a Knight of the Round Table, he had a broken arm. Among the Knights of the Round Table, only Bedivere had a relationship with the arm. And when he was in the Uruk Singularity, Wu Ming once talked with Merlin. Through the conversation, Wu Ming learned that Merlin was actually very clear about the 6th singularity where Wu Ming was now. After all, he had clairvoyance. And the fact that Artoria was in this singularity was revealed by Merlin, otherwise, Wu Ming wouldn't know that Artoria was here. Still through the conversation, Wu Ming vaguely learned from Merlin that Merlin was not doing nothing. He had foreshadowed something. As for what the foreshadowing was, unfortunately, Merlin either changed the topic or shook his head mysteriously and refused to say it. Maybe Bedivere was that foreshadowing. But what the truth was, he still had to wait until the truth came out. After ending his inner thoughts, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was standing in the same place and leaning on his great sword like a crutch. The first Hassan came to tell me all this, I will remember it in my heart. I will consider going to the holy city again. Wu Ming didn't give up the idea of going to the holy city to stop Artoria. Because of the oath, Wu Ming chose to temporarily leave the holy city and go to the desert to seize the Holy Grail. Fortunately, he met Gadotsi and her party on the way. As a result, his goal of helping Gadotsi repair the singularity as soon as possible was half completed. One was to find Gadotsi, and the other was to complete the goal. The former had been completed, and the latter was almost done. After all, Wu Ming had already taken the Holy Grail back. After Gadotsi accompanied Matthew to solve Galahad's wish, Wu Ming would give the Holy Grail to Chaldea and begin to repair the singularity. But after knowing that Artoria seemed to be hiding something from Wu Ming, coupled with the fact that the first Hassan personally came to remind him, Wu Ming decided to stay in this singularity for a while. Don't say too much. This is my thanks, the first Hassan responded to Wu Ming in a brief and simple tone, as if saying goodbye. Then, accompanied by a black fog, the first Hassan disappeared. At the same time, the dark and gloomy feeling in the room also disappeared. The eyes of every skywing species in their room also changed from scarlet eyes of sword runes to golden eyes of sword and shield. All the skywing species calmed down. Abent, who used the entire floating tree as his body, also relaxed. Wuming could clearly feel that Abent's magic power had stabilized a lot. As expected of the Hassans, the assassin of the assassins, with the existence of the crown's spiritual base, Wuming could not help but exclaim. To be honest, just this aura that even Wuming could not detect was enough to show how powerful the first Hassan was. However, if Ramses II were to see this scene, he would probably change his opinion of Wuming. Look at Wuming. He could even vaguely detect the crown assassin and was able to dodge the opponent's attack. Although he did not dodge, at least he moved. Unlike him, he did not even know that his head had been chopped off. If not for the first Hassan showing himself at the end, Ramses II probably would not have known who had attacked him. If not for the fact that Wuming had met Ramses II and had a little understanding of him, Wuming might have attributed Ramses II's obedience to fear after being cut by the first Hassan. However, it was precisely because Wuming had met Ramses II and understood his character that he did not think so. How could a guy like Gilgamesh know how to write the word fear? This king-like courage was what Wuming appreciated. Just as Wuming was thinking about whether to immediately go to the holy city, the first Hassan's voice suddenly came from the void. I have cut off thy foreign air, and the armor of refutation shall return. This was undoubtedly the divine ability of the first Hassan. Having seen it before, Wuming was not frightened and instead nodded in understanding. Instead, it was the skywing species and Abant who were startled by the sudden turn of events from the first Hassan and collectively entered battle mode. This made them smile helplessly and gratifyingly. They were indeed no match for the first Hassan, but for the safety of their master, they would still stand up. The loyalty of the skywing species was vividly displayed. Previously, when Wuming's arm was cut off by the first Hassan, almost all the skywings woke up from their standby slumber and rushed toward Wuming. The reason it was almost was because Jillian did not come. Logically speaking, although Jillian would definitely be the first to come in such a situation, there was no sign of Jillian this time. In truth, it was mainly because Jillian was still in a deep slumber and recovering from the previous incident. It was similar to a protective device in a human body. Jillian was severely lacking in magic power and was recovering, so she might not be able to wake up even if she wanted to. It was the same principle as how humans would fall into a coma after losing large amounts of blood. Not bothering with Jillian, Wuming walked out of the room. Now that all the skywings were awake, he had to go and comfort them so they could sleep. Otherwise, even if they were in a non-combat state, Wuming was afraid that their berserk state would devour their rationality. However, when he thought about the number of skywings, Wuming felt his stomach ache. I'll just treat it as training. Chapter 721. The skywings had fallen asleep, but it was not Wuming who pacified them one by one. After all, this was Abanthi's body, and with Abanthi's help, Wuming had successfully experienced what it was like to be a leader. Abanthi sent a collective message to the skywings to pacify them. However, this time, the skywings were more like sleep than standby. Because it was Wuming who had personally gone to comfort the skywings, he had asked them to lie down on the bed like ordinary girls instead of floating in the air and waiting for an opportunity. Although the skywings did not quite understand this behavior, it was still an order from their master, so they still obeyed. Lying on the bed, the skywings entered a standby state, but to an outsider, they really did look like they were asleep. Back in the monitoring room, Wuming sat on the sofa and browsed through a large magic screen in front of him. The screen displayed the basic data of the skywings. Although Abanthi did not really have modern technological knowledge, its magical knowledge was pretty good. Thus, it displayed the basic data of the skywings in the form of a magic screen to Wuming. Although as the master of these tens of thousands of skywings, Wuming could see the information of their servants, Wu-ming could not look at every sky wing one by one. With the idea of slacking off, when the sky wings were summoned, Wu-ming only looked at their ranks. The information that Abanthi had prepared for Wu-ming was a great help to Wu-ming. Because the information of ordinary Skywing Ray servants was the same, Aban collected the information of those Skywing Ray servants into a sample and took it out. Unless it was a Skywing with a special skill, the information would not be listed separately. Thus, the screen in front of Wu-ming only had the information of a few servants. After browsing for some time, Wu-ming turned off the virtual screen in front of him and leaned back on the sofa. He crossed one hand and rubbed his forehead with the other. Sure enough, Berserker's spirit base has too much of an effect on the Skywings. According to the information provided by Abanthi, the Skywings summoned by Berserker had an EX Berserker rank. What did an EX Berserker mean? Either they were crazy to the extreme and could communicate with others, or they could not communicate at all, not even with their master. One was the extreme of the positive side, and the other was the extreme of the negative side. It was clear that the Skywings had the extreme of the negative side. To put it simply, if the battle went on for a little longer, the Skywings might not be able to control themselves, just like Gopril. There was even a high chance that they would break from their master's control, which meant that they might break free from Wu-ming's control or not listen to him. As a result, the Skywing species became expendable, because once they were used, they would lose control. This was something Wu-ming didn't want to see. Fortunately, Azrael was different from the other Skywings. As the commander of the Skywings, Azrael had the ability to resist Berserk. Thus, Wu-ming did not have to worry that Azrael would go Berserk over at Godatsu's place. However, the other Skywings were not so lucky. According to the information provided by the servants, the Skywings that had gone Berserk were of little value. In that case, the Skywings can't move freely, Wu-ming muttered to himself. However, as the original individual, Azrael, and the foreign individual, Gopril, could still move. Azrael had a special skill, which allowed her to move freely. As for Gopril, Wu-ming decided that once she woke up, he would have her follow him. With Wu-ming by his side, Wu-ming did not feel that Gopril would go out of control. Wu-ming could stop Gopril the moment he saw her lose her rationality. In the worst-case scenario, he could use Annihilation Lock to restrain her again. The reason why he did not bring the other Skywings was that Gopril also had a special skill. As the strongest foreign individual, Gopril had a skill that greatly strengthened her damage. In other words, Gopril's Skystrike was much stronger than the other Skystrikes of the other Skywings in terms of explosion range, power, and release speed. In fact, because of the skill, Gopril's mana consumption was much lower than the other Skywings. Facing an existence like Gopril, Wu-ming had no reason not to bring her along. This reason also explained why Wu-ming had chosen to have Gopril follow him. It was not because she was a foreign individual and had special privileges, but because she had a special skill. Because she was a foreign individual, she was powerful. And because she was powerful, her character was also extraordinary. It was precisely because of her extraordinary character that she had a special skill that was different from the other Skywings. Servants were the clones of heroic spirits, and heroic spirits were a kind of spiritual existence that was a combination of the human spirit and historical legends. This meant that the abilities of heroic spirits did not only rely on their own abilities, but also their inheritance. For example, take a servant that Wu-ming had once met, the Assyrian Empress Semiramis. The noble phantasm she used in Tuliphas was the Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble phantasm that was sublimated from the essence of the Hanging Garden, a miracle building that had disappeared. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was not actually created by Semiramis. Its actual creator was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. It was precisely because of this that it was called the Hanging Garden of Babylon. It could be said that the Hanging Garden of Babylon had nothing to do with her, but because it was rumored in later generations that she had created the Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, was combined with Semiramis. The Vain Garden of Babylon, Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble artifact, came into being. The Skywings had not died, were not humans, and had no connection with the human spirit, but they had legends. Just like how Wuming had left behind legends in history and obtained a different identity as a servant, the Sky Wings also had stories in other worlds. Since they had stories, they naturally had the possibility of becoming heroic spirits. And Wuming had cheated by summoning the Sky Wings, so some of their skills or noble artifacts would naturally change because of what they had done in their own world. Azrael and Gopril were examples. Since that's the case, I'll just use the other Sky Wings as my trump cards. After that, Wuming put down the hand that was rubbing his eyebrows and opened his eyes. Immediately after, Wuming casually waved his hand, and golden ripples spread out around Wuming. A silver-white chain with a dark purple aura extended out of the golden ripples. Chapter 722. This was the chain that Wuming had used to subdue the berserk Gopril. Its name was Annihilation Lock. Wuming looked at the chain that resembled a heaven lock but was no longer a heaven lock. His heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. Wuming stroked the Annihilation Lock, and the Annihilation Lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Because of Wuming's touch, it flickered with a faint purple light. I didn't expect you to turn a fake into a real noble artifact. That's right. The Annihilation Lock in Wuming's hand had already become a noble artifact. It was not wrong to call it a noble artifact. Wuming had added his own authority to the chain. Although it was a weakened authority, the authority of a god was still not to be underestimated. When Wuming sent Gopril back, he discovered that the pseudo-heaven lock, which had absorbed one of Wuming's weakened authority, had been upgraded to the Annihilation Lock, which was a noble artifact. The Annihilation Lock was no longer a fake that would dissipate due to the evaporation of magic power. Instead, it had become a genuine noble artifact that would not wear out even after 1,000 years. The danger of this singularity is beyond my expectations, Wuming said calmly. To find help, Wuming had used his dependent incarnation. As there was no effective way to subdue Gopril, Wuming had deposited the authority of the Annihilation Incarnation into the pseudo-heaven lock, so that the chain that he had casually created could bind the berserk Gopril. And just now, Wuming had also used his giant incarnation. As for when he used it, it was when Wuming had punched the first Hassan. At that time, Wuming defined the first Hassan as an enemy who had cut off one of his arms. Wuming did not dare to be careless. Therefore, Wuming directly used Giant Incarnation, gathered the power of Giant into his fist, and punched at First Hassan. However, Wuming was surprised that First Hassan's shield was able to block his attack. As expected of a crown servant. Even though the assassin class was generally considered the weakest among the 7 classes, the assassin class was not inferior to the saber class, which was generally considered to be the best class. The other saber servants were slightly inferior to the first Hassan. However, Wuming was not weak either. The Giant Incarnation's attack directly shattered the first Hassan's shield. That was the weapon of a crown servant, and it was not something that could be broken by just anyone. Just like the first Hassan's simple and unadorned greatsword that looked a little damaged and had become unsharp, and the cloak behind the first Hassan that looked like a ragged cloth. Both of them were not as weak as they looked on the surface. The greatsword that was constantly infused with the faith of the first Hassan had reached a level where it was undamaged, and it even had an instant death effect. The broken cloak was also quite powerful. Not only could it set off a sandstorm that was enough to cover the sun, but it also had a powerful defensive ability that was not weaker than the first Hassan's shield. Therefore, Wuming was able to break the first Hassan's shield. After all, in Wuming's opinion, the body of a servant was still too weak, unless he could also have a crown spiritual base. However, the crown spiritual base was created by suppression. Wuming did not need to submit to someone who was destined to be weaker than him, even if the other party was good to him. Anyway, when Wuming found his body, Wuming did not need to be a yes man anymore. If everything went well, maybe after solving this singularity, Wuming could find his body before Gadotsi and others went to Uruk. Then, he could directly solve the singularity of the Uruk and kill Gydia. He had already seen Gidea's means, and he also forced the other party to detonate the black mud on the outer layer of each world to choose to severely injure Wooming. Gidea must have also been injured, otherwise, he would not let Wooming mess around in this singularity. Gidea, who also saw Wooming's power, was really vigilant against Wooming. Since Wooming had already done so many things in this singularity, and no one stopped him, it was obvious that Gidea did not pay attention to this singularity. In Gidea's view, even with the help of Wooming, Chaldea could repair these burned residues, and it would have no impact on the result. To be more ruthless, even if the burn of humanity was rewritten, and the burn of humanity was successfully restored by Chaldea, it would have no impact on Gidea. The reason was very clear to Wooming, because Gidea's vision, or ambition, was no longer here. Gidea, who had come into contact with the black mud, had long changed his target to other worlds, a wider sea of stars. Although Wooming did not know what Gidea's original purpose was, Wooming knew that Gidea's purpose had changed from the original goal to going to other worlds. This was like a person's original plan was to take a rocket to the moon that was suitable for him, but before taking off, he found a more habitable planet, Mars. Then, using the existing fuel, changing the route, and going to Mars wasn't impossible, right? As for the residues of the fuel, at this point, that kind of thing was no longer necessary for that person to pay attention to. But for Gidea, Wooming, this bomb still needed to be paid attention to. And for Wooming, this hidden danger, Gidea, also needed to be paid attention to. Although Wooming was confident that the next time he fought with Gidea, Gidea might also have the same confidence. After all, both sides understood each other after fighting once, so Gidea might also have a way to deal with Wooming. But that was all in the future. From the current situation, Wooming and Gidea wouldn't meet for a while, and Wooming didn't have to worry about Gidea coming out to cause trouble. Closing his eyes, Wooming went deep into his inner world. A huge stone plate appeared in Wooming's heart. There were 12 small stone plates on the large stone plate. The small stone plates were placed in the 12 o'clock direction like a scale, and 3 small stone plates were in a completely dim, petrified grayish-white state. They were the giant incarnation at 2 o'clock, the annihilation incarnation at 5 o'clock, and the dependent incarnation at 8 o'clock. These 3 incarnations had been used by Wooming, and Wooming could only use the remaining 9 incarnations. But Wooming didn't regret it. After all, good steel should be used on the blade. After that, Wooming left the inner world and opened his eyes. The next thing he needed to think about was Artoria. Chapter 723. Whether it was from Ramses II or the first Hassan, Wooming learned one thing. That was, Artoria's change was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be more to it than meets the eye. And according to the first Hassan's words of, "I need thy rescue," Artoria's current state was not good. Although Wooming seemed to have a conflict with Artoria, Wooming could not sit still once something related to Artoria appeared. The feelings that he had gained from being with her for most of his life were not something that could be abandoned just because of a quarrel. If anyone thought that this feeling could be easily abandoned, then they had underestimated the bond between Wooming and Artoria. If I have a conflict with her and bully her until she cries, that's fine. But if you bully her until she cries, then I'm sorry, but you're done for. You'll die a horrible death, the kind that doesn't even leave behind a trace. Artoria was that, she, and Wooming was that, I. When it came to Artoria, Wooming would never give in, not even half a step. Wooming estimated that this matter might not have much to do with the Magus King, but the singularity was indeed caused by the Magus King in the beginning. And Wooming could not find trouble with the Magus King at the moment, so he could only take the right approach. Calculating the time, Tachika and the others should have arrived at the Holy City by now, Wooming thought. He decided to go to the Holy City first to meet up with Gadotsi and the others. But right now, Gopril, who was in a coma, had yet to wake up. Wooming did not dare to let her move freely, and restricting her movements was not appropriate either. So Wooming decided to wait until Gopril woke up. Of course, Wu-Ming could also choose to heal Gopril and take the initiative to wake her up. But because Wu-Ming wanted to punish Gopril, he chose to let her recover on her own. However, things were different now. Wu-Ming had to hurry. With that in mind, Wu-Ming stood up from the sofa and walked out of the room. Abent was quite perceptive. He took the initiative to open a door on the wall not far away. If he was not mistaken, that door should be Jillian's room. Thinking so, Wu-Ming walked to the front of Gypsy's door and politely knocked on the door. However, how could the unconscious Gopril possibly respond to Wu-Ming? Wu-Ming knocking on the door was just a mischievous act. After knocking on the door, Wu-Ming pushed the door open and entered. His actions were rather smooth, and from this, it could be confirmed that Wu-Ming had no intention of entering the room with Gopril's permission. Sometimes, pleasure, or bad taste, was just that simple. Wu-Ming subconsciously looked around when he entered Gopril's room. A room that looked no different from the other Skywings entered Wu-Ming's eyes. The plain walls, the plain bed, and the plain table served as a foil to the angelic girl's beauty and purity. Gopril was like a sleeping beauty, quietly lying on her simple and unadorned bed. The girl's wings, which were filled with pure white feathers, extended from her back to her front, gently covering her thighs and abdomen like a quilt. The girl's eyes were closed, and her beautiful face was exposed to the air. The girl's hands were crossed and placed above her abdomen and below her chest. Her chest rose and fell as if she was having a sweet dream. Wu-Ming, who was immersed in the picture of Sleeping Beauty, sighed. Afterward, Wu-Ming walked over to the bed and sat down. She's clearly in the posture of a slender girl, so why is she a combat weapon? Could it be that Artemis has some sort of special fetish? Wu-Ming jokingly muttered to himself. Looking at her slender body, no one would have imagined that such a girl could erupt with destructive power. She's beautiful on the outside. If only the hearts of Skywings could be as beautiful as a girl's. Wu-Ming sighed. Beautiful things had a beautiful interior, and this was something that every normal person yearned for. However, the hearts of Skywing girls were not as beautiful as they looked. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were bloodthirsty. They were combat weapons, and they were weapons that were originally created with the goal of killing gods. Moreover, for some reason, Skywing girls had an interest in collecting heads. This meant that Skywing girls were not suited for human life. It was a good thing that Wu-Ming did not require them to completely integrate into human life. Not being able to fight at will was akin to hell for them. Wu-Ming understood the principle that one's temperament had to be changed bit by bit. When things reached an extreme, they could only move in the opposite direction. It was precisely because of this that Wu-Ming had summoned the Skywing girls to help at this particular point. Although he did not know how much time had passed in their world, they must be feeling rather uncomfortable because they could not fight as they wished. In that case, he would let them release some pressure. Not only that, but their arrival could also help Wu-Ming. This was a plan that could kill two birds with one stone. It was a sure win. However, who would have thought that these Skywings would be summoned as berserkers? Their adaptability to the berserker class allowed the Skywing girls to reach the highest level of berserk. Moreover, because it was not a normal summon, this level of berserk gave them a chance to break away from their master's orders. The plan to let the Skywings release the pressure in their hearts had failed because the Skywings were too prone to losing their minds in their current state. The plan to let the Skywings help also failed because the Skywings, who were prone to losing their minds, had no way of helping Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming even wondered if he had hidden his luck. This was simply a case of misfortune never coming singly. Wait a minute. Wu-Ming looked at Gopril's beautiful face and suddenly realized something. If I use Vitality Incarnation, can I suppress Gopril's berserk? Yes, Wu-Ming suddenly thought of his own authority. Since Wu-Ming's origin dragon became stronger after the baptism of origin, Wu-Ming hardly used Vitality Incarnation. The only time he used it recently was to restore the life of No Name. The reason why he did not use this incarnation was very simple. It was just too useless. Vitality Incarnation could provide Wu-Ming with spring-like vitality. Not only could it recover injuries and mana, but it could also resist negative effects such as curses. However, after going through the origin baptism, Silent Dragon's recovery ability wasn't weak. Injuries and mana could be recovered quickly, and the origin dragon's body was also immune to negative effects. Therefore, Wuming basically did not use Vitality Incarnation. So, since Wuming could not use it, could this incarnation work on a servant who had fallen into Berserk? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.